It's free. I'm grateful that I took advantage because it's something that has put me in touch with my child, or closer to my child and her development.
About 1:30 p.m. and this is the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency meeting. I will now call the meeting to order, and we'll begin with a roll call.
Director Crane. Not present.
Not
Director
present.
Gasca.
Here.
Director McNerlin. Present. Director Navarez. Not present. Director White.
Here.
And Chair McCordy.
Here. Okay, so the next thing is the approval of agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay, so all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Next is public comment on items not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the room or online who wishes to make a public comment? Okay, there isn't, so we'll move on to that, which is consent items. Is there a motion to adopt the consent?
Recording in progress.
Sorry, interrupted there. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda items?
To move to adopt the consent items.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion before we go on? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, next we come to discussion and possible items. Agenda item 5A is the GSA Monitoring Network, and we have a presentation for this, I believe. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. If Eric, you will take over.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Gordy. I would like to invite Audra from Larry Walker Associates to provide a presentation on the GSA Monitoring Network and take it from there. Audra, thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to update you during network. I will let you know what sorts of changes are going to be up for your consideration today. All right, so again, we are focusing primarily on the groundwater level monitoring network. I am going to cover some information that you have seen before, and we've been sharing this information also with the TAC and keeping them updated on developments. So sort of briskly through some of the background information, and then we'll highlight some of the potential fiscal impact so that you can consider that as you decide whether to proceed. All right, so again, we're focusing on two updates to the monitoring network to groundwater level. And that will be, first of all, replacement of a destroyed well that was part of the work. The second will be installation of a continuous sensor with telemetry at one of the locations that has been experiencing some low level deviations, some deviations in water level that we've observed as a result of monthly monitoring. So let's go ahead and do a quick refresher as to what comprises our representative monitoring network for groundwater level. So as you can see here, we have 7 locations originally that were part of the network. One of those we discovered in the course of annual reporting and shared with the board was unfortunately destroyed in 2018 and has not been measured since. So because we have a rather limited monitoring network at this time, we do think it would be beneficial to add in another representative monitoring point moving forward so that we can also hopefully include this in GSP annual reports in the future. There will be an opportunity, of course, to adjust the network moving forward as the board sees fit, as the TAC sees fit. And so one option that we are proposing, presented previously, is this idea of using Ukiah Valley 36, which is an existing component of the broader monitoring network, but is not presently a representative monitoring point, or RMP. So this location also taps into Aquifer 2, as the destroyed well did. It's within about a 1-mile proximity to that destroyed well. It's not too close to other pre-existing RMP locations. It is currently being measured monthly as part of the broader network that we have for the Ukiah Valley Basin. Okay, so we think for these reasons, it could be considered a suitable substitute. All right, and again, we can evaluate and update the network further in the future if we decide a new well might be drilled, if another well location appears to be more beneficial. So this would be something that we use for now. So again, a quick reminder of the fact that we had a nice long record for, unfortunately, this destroyed RMP well. As you can see here, we have a shorter record for the replacement well, but we have more recently monthly measurements, and we think we could develop sustainable management criteria in a preliminary evaluation that would accompany incorporation of this site into the representative monitoring point network. All right. In terms of fiscal impact, actually adding this location to the representative monitoring point network, officially logging it with DWR, would be a negligible fiscal impact. It's already part of the network, the broader network. We receive monthly water level information. Where a fiscal impact in sort of the immediate term would come in would be in developing the preliminary minimum threshold, measurable objective, and trigger point, the sustainable management criteria that we use to evaluate the performance of water level in these different wells. And so again, this is something that could be further evaluated during the 5-year GSP update or periodic update, but we estimate it would cost around $2,500. All right, so I can pause now. If not, I will go ahead and move on to our second item related to the monitoring network.
Any questions from board members at this point? Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. All right, so again, the second issue is related to installation of a continuous sensor at the Ukiah Valley 1 location. This is also a well that is part of our representative monitoring point network. And so one of the interesting things that has resulted in monthly measurements that are made by the Mendocino County RCD is that we've observed some fluctuations in the water level that were not annual measure being collected. So as a reminder for what that looks like, we saw this earlier in the year. Well, excuse the lag with my slides here. It's updated on my screen. Hopefully it will also update on what's being shared shortly.
I think you're good now, Audra.
Is it good? Okay. And so as you can see here, we have a water level record from about 2015 through the present. The most recent measurement on here is from August of this year. And we can see that the red circles are indicating what would be kind of the measurement pattern. And so prior to 2022, we didn't see a deviation below our minimum threshold. As a reminder, that minimum threshold is the level below which we start to have concern about the sustainability of the basin. We are not in non-compliance. That would require more wells to be deviating below the minimum threshold for more consecutive years. But this does sort of capture our attention and make us want to investigate the issue further, understand what's happening in the basin, and also evaluate and collect more data so that the board and TAC can evaluate whether we want to maintain part of the RMP network moving forward. But we need sort of some evidence and some background information collected in order, I think, for that decision to be made. And so again, we want to try to understand, are these excursions happening really transitorily? Are they maybe the result of nearby pumping that's taking place? Wells nearby, there is some evidence perhaps that's been the case. And so a continuous sensor with telemetry will remotely monitor the water level and just have that monthly visit be a ground truth for the condition in the well. Again, having this information will allow the board to make more informed decisions moving forward, to maybe move forward with other inquiries as to activities and other nearby wells in the basin. And I think it'll just provide a much better basis for future decision-making and management. All right. So in terms of the fiscal impact, the actual equipment and installation of a continuous sensor with telemetry, again, which allows for remote monitoring of the water level in the Ukiah Valley 1 well, would come in at around $7,000. We did include some options since this would require a staff visit up to Ukiah in case the board deems it favorable to have a visit to do some other maintenance at other locations. Sort of minimal maintenance of existing sensors that we have at different well locations in the basin would be an additional $1,000. Beyond that, if the board wished for the tech to go ahead and do some pre-season maintenance at some of the 2 stream gauge locations in sort of upper Russian River within the Ukiah Valley Basin, and to visit all the groundwater sites, that would be an additional $2,000 to $3,000, bringing the sort of total sum to around $10,000 to $11,000. All right. Yes, Laurel. Or excuse me, did you raise your hand?
I did. I just want to remind everybody that our grant has the funding for this, although we can't hire you guys to do it. But we have the contract's been signed and we have the money to install 3 different continuous sensors at wells with telemetry. So if the GSA board would like to recommend what wells you would like done, that would be very helpful.
Oh, Laurel, that's very exciting to hear the contract has been signed.
Yeah, finally. Yoo-hoo!
Wonderful. Okay, that's great. And good timing in terms of decision making as well. Okay, wonderful. All right, so that is actually, that concludes our recommended updates for the monitoring network and the fiscal impact. So I will stop sharing my screen and pause in case there are any questions.
I have one.
I'm sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, Sean, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm in Oregon, so I'm a little remote. We're talking about the MT1 site, I think it is, or whatever.
UVB one?
Yes,
think
I'm
so.
sorry.
Yes.
Anyone, the one that had the dramatic drawdown, as people would call it, or whatever. I looked
I'm sorry,
a little
could
bit.
you say that again, Johnny?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just I was interested in how the data really looked compared to the data we collected previously at the 2 sampling dates that we used to look at. It was hard for me to tell, but it looked like it was kind of essentially the same. We just never saw what happened in between.
Let me share that. Are you able to see the screen? Let me pull that up again. So
Sure.
that's what we thought initially. And then interestingly, here, I will share my screen again.
Thank you.
What we realized is that, of course, here we go. All right, here we go. So we did, so here you can see, yep, the red dots are indicating kind of the standard biannual measurements that were made previously. We did actually capture a deviation last year that would have counted as a biannual measurement, the fall measurement, and it was below the minimum threshold. So that was interesting. I was thinking initially that perhaps, whoops, it was just the frequency of monitoring that revealed this pattern. But even if we had stayed with our biannual measurements, we would have seen a deviation last year. And it's looking like it's possible. Again, we don't have yet the September measurements on this graphic or October. It's looking like we could still possibly this year see a well water level value below the minimum threshold.
Interesting. Okay, great. That was my question. Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem.
Eric.
So to go back to Laurel's suggestion and also to put the costs into context for everyone, I'm going to share my screen really quick. Oh, there it is. It's on the screen. So as we can recall, the monitoring data collection budget this year is $71,000. That was primarily for MCRCD to conduct monitoring and also for CLSI and Laurel's group to do surface water monitoring. And so with the update on the groundwater monitoring, we think we might have some wiggle room there, and that's why this budget that Larry Walker has proposed, and I asked them just to provide those values and those numbers so we have them, because at the time, Laurel did remind us that that could be an option once they have the contract signed. So between, I think, August and now, it sounds like that contract was signed, Laurel, is that correct?
Yes, it started in about mid-September.
Okay, perfect. So then that gives us the option now to look at potential locations and then see if we can find a nexus between the RMP, the Representative Monitoring Network that we have right now, and then if some of these wells that we would like to potentially be monitored through the Bureau of Reclamation grant that Laurel has, then, and if those wells also work for your study and purposes, Laurel, we could definitely explore that. So then that way, those costs that Larry Walker provided could be covered by the grant. And then if not, we can find the most optimal way to use the existing budget to make it so we're not spending more than we initially were planning this year. So I just want to make sure I clarify that there's a couple of options and that regardless, we're aiming to keep it within the $71,000 budget that we already budgeted for this year. And then there's one other thing I wanted to point out, that we actually have some more money available this year based on the fiscal year end cash balance. So we do have a little bit more cushion and wiggle room to work with as well. So I am a little bit more flexible, I guess you could say, with some of the options we have. And so with that, I think one possible revision to the recommended action that could be considered by the board then is, instead of approving these proposed changes as we have presented them in the presentation, we can maybe modify that motion to approve the proposed changes to the GSA Monitoring Network and explore potential options to have it be funded through the Bureau of Reclamation grant. And then that way we cover both options, and whatever is the most beneficial to the GSA budget, we can then move forward on one of those.
Any questions or comments from board members?
I only, just to confirm what I heard, Laurel's got money that could be used instead of ours to put these continuous monitoring devices in. And she can coordinate with Larry Walker as to where it would be most useful for our needs and her needs. That's what I'm hearing.
That is correct, yes.
I make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to, you want to read the motion back to us, Eric? So,
And just to clarify, Director White, the motion that I provided, the modified one, right? Okay.
yeah.
So the recommended action of the motion would have been, is the board approve proposed changes to the GSA Monitoring Network and explore options to use the Bureau of Reclamation grant to fund the monitoring network changes if possible.
Okay, any further discussion? Any public comment? Okay, if not, I guess we can call for the question. Roll call vote. I think our preference is to do roll call vote for the record.
Director Daska,
Yes.
Director McNerlin. Yes. Director White,
Yes.
and Chair McCordy.
Yes. Okay, motion carries. All right, so we move on to the next item, which is, I guess it's a LWA contract amendment?
No.
No. Oh. Maybe I have this upside down.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, item B, item 5B, which is GSA Governance Compliance Assessment. Okay, Eric?
Thank you, Chairman Gordy. I have Holly Roberson on the line. She's our legal counsel for the GSA. So I'm just going to really quickly just introduce a little bit of the history here and then pass it off to Holly. All GSAs, JPAs that exist, all government agencies, there's typical government compliance items that we have to do. And so one of the things that we've been working on since Westjoe took on this role to manage the GSA on behalf of the member agencies is to look at all the compliance things that we've been doing and then seeing what areas we can improve upon. And so with that, I've been working with legal counsel and in discussions with the chair to make sure that we're doing everything we can on these items. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Holly to go through what we're proposing and why. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you today. As you might be able to hear, I'm a little under the weather, so I've decided not to join you in person.
Thank you for that.
So I'm just appearing remotely. So if you look, thank you, Eric, on page 37 of your staff report, as Eric said, we've done a first high-level review of the GSA's existing policies, JPA agreements, bylaws, etc., compared them against what the requirements are for GSAs, and made some recommendations as how we can improve compliance. This is not a nitpicking comb through every possible thing you could do at this point. This is more of a high level. We strongly recommend that you do these things as soon as feasible, because these would be your higher priority items. So we can divide this into phases, and the lower priority items can wait until you have revenue from the rate and fee study, should that be approved. So these higher priority items fall into a couple of categories: use of GSA resources and equipment, open government policies, and decision-making policies in education and training. And within each of those, we've itemized for you what the specific policies would be. So the reason that at Chronic we recommend that GSAs have good policies on these is it adds a little more meat on the bones of just saying, yes, we'll comply with the law. And so it makes it so that your staff and your council and your board and just anybody who needs to comply with these laws, you've actually adopted a policy that tells people what they need to do and how and why and when and where, so that it facilitates compliance and makes it very clear. So a concrete example of that is what's allowable for use of GSA resources and equipment. Obviously, you want everybody to comply with that, and in order for them to comply with it, there ought to be a policy that tells them what they can and can't do. Some of this goes back a little bit to how the GSA was set up. So you might have assumed that all of this would have been done already, but in some cases it hasn't been. So there's no time like the present. And what we ideally would like to do is put together a handbook, both a digital and a hard copy version, so that you and future board members and current staff and future staff can all literally be on the same page to make sure you're staying in compliance. So this is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of activity. We think it'll take about $5,000 worth of legal time that is within your existing legal budget. And I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. If you go deeper into your packet, there's a more detailed analysis and memo that describes in more specifically what we would recommend.
Okay, are there any questions for Counselor Holly on this?
When's the last time we updated our policies?
I don't know that we ever have.
So the JPA has been in place since the founding of the GSA, so that has not been updated any time. And then we don't intend to update the JPA because that could potentially be just a little bit too much to do. But when it comes to the bylaws, they have not been updated, I think, as well since the founding of the GSA. So that is one potential option, is to update the bylaws where appropriate. But we have adopted several policies that are in the attachment 4 of this staff report that went into how we handle making decisions for letters of support, for grants, for the timing between quarterly meetings and stuff like that. We also developed a procurement policy that was updated because before that we had a really low bar for fiscal amount before we would have to go competitive. And it was too low, generally speaking, compared to what's pretty standard out there. So we revised that policy and also provided a little bit more clarity about how that would be handled procurement just across the board. And then we had another policy that we did just regarding decision-making between board meetings as a whole for anything that was like an emergency or anything came up like that, special board meetings. And so that's what we've done so far. And since then, there just hasn't been a whole lot of movement on those things. And as Holly mentioned, really the biggest motivation behind this is so if there's any new board members or TAC members or staff, that it's very easy for anyone to have that handbook and then be able to reference it, and the expectations and everything are very clear. Whereas right now, there's patchy areas too. We would have to confer with.
Be in with our bylaws and policies that council will implement. I thought I heard her mention that.
Eric, I can answer
Yeah,
that.
please do.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So what we've recommended here are the highest priority items that are required.
Yeah.
So we're not recommending, because of budget issues, a lot of like best practices policies. That would all be in a phase 2 for future consideration.
So as a new member, because I'm on the sanitation district, and then they appointed me to IRWA, and then IRWA appointed me to here. And I was like, but I'm from sewer, I don't know anything about water. And they're just, just go back and read all the minutes, right? So that was my, that's what I was told to do. So it would be really helpful for a new member to come in and say, here's a handbook, whatever you need, just go through this. And then if you have any questions, let us know. Instead of just referring me to go back and read as many minutes as I can get back,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my input.
Also, welcome as a new member. It's great to have a new member. And there is training available if you need. It sounds like you already have prior experience, but if you need some quick training on something like the Brown Act, which is public transparency statute, things like that, there are plenty of free like webinars and things. So if you'd like any resources like that, please let me know. I'm happy to send them to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, especially when the 2 years, updating it every 2 years, I think it is. We need to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Eric, can we have that as a follow-up item for our new member?
Yes.
Just to provide her with some resources. And I'm happy to do the training for you, but there's pretty good free online webinars too.
Yeah. I'll make a note right now.
Okay. So did the board have any other questions about this recommendation?
Al?
Yeah, I just to make a comment that there's the higher level things that you're talking about, sort of the broader overview. I think it's important that that's current, up to date, and compliant. As far as getting into the fine print, that seems to be a place where the farther in you go, the more you end up looking at some court case where somebody did something, somebody else, and I'm not really interested in that. I wouldn't want to spend money at that level, but this level to me is good insurance.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not proposing the Cadillac version to you. Up in Ukiah, this is more of like a Honda Civic, like get it done kind of level.
And I believe that Chronic has a bunch of resources and text already available that is very applicable to a GSA. So it limits on the amount of any extra that we would have to go beyond. And that's why that, yeah, copy and pasting, but obviously with, QC to make sure it's good on everything. But that's why the cost is up to $5,000 and not beyond, because it would be minimal overall.
Yeah, and Eric's actually being modest there. So a concrete example of that, as you all know, is Chronic also is general counsel to 3 GSAs in Sonoma County. And so Westios, which is also a consultant there, has looked through their policies, which Chronic would have written, and identified which policies they already have that overlap with the policies we're recommending. And so that way we can really be as cost effective and efficient as possible. And like Eric said, we won't just copy and paste, but we certainly have a good starting point, and then we can just make sure it's really specifically works for the GSA and for Mendocino County. But we don't have to start from scratch.
Okay. Other questions or comments from board members? Questions or comments from people in the room or online? Okay, with that in mind, I would entertain a motion for the recommended action, which is the board authorize GSA staff and legal counsel to draft updated and/or new policies and procedures to be considered for the board's approval at the January 2024 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Honda Civic.
Okay. I think we're ready for a roll call vote.
Okay. Director Daska,
Yes.
Director McNairland,
Yes.
Director White,
Yes.
and Chair McGordy.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you. Hope you get better soon.
Thank you, Glenn.
All right, so now we're on to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife grant application update from LWA.
Thank you, Chair McGordy. So we have some exciting stuff to go over and share with you. We've been working really hard on this, and I would like to say thank you to the City of Ukiah staff and LWA for all their hard work trying to move both grant applications forward. And so with that, I will pass it off to LWA to give us a slideshow and be here to answer any questions. Also like to note, we're a little ahead of schedule, so we have 25 minutes to go into this, so feel free to ask questions if you have any. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Eric. As Eric mentioned, we have been working hard to prepare the materials for submission to CDFW on 2 separate grant applications. So the board did hear some of the basics related to these 2 grant application submissions during the special board meeting that we had a couple weeks ago. And in addition, the grant ad hoc committee has been reviewing application materials and providing feedback. So some of this may be more familiar to some of you than others. Just to make sure everybody's on the same page, again, we're targeting 2 projects that will intersect with activities occurring in the Ukiah Valley Basin. The first of those is going to be a Western Hills land acquisition. And this is the grant application that we are preparing on behalf of the City of Ukiah. They will actually, if we are successful, administer the grant, but it was one of the project management activities identified in our groundwater sustainability plan as beneficial for recharge and source water protection for the Ukiah Valley groundwater basin. So that's where our interest lies and it kind of intersects. And in addition, we'll see that there's a nice confluence, if you will, with the other project that we have proposed in the Upper Russian River to examine interconnected surface waters and groundwater dependent ecosystems. So as I mentioned, since I have a little bit more time, as I mentioned previously, we've had a very encouraging consultation with CDFW staff and additional follow-up from them that I'll mention more in subsequent slides. But interconnected surface waters and groundwater dependent ecosystems and other kind of environmental beneficial uses within the basin were really identified as one of the areas for focus and development by DWR staff in their report where they recommended the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan for approval. So they felt overall that the GSP would move the basin effectively towards sustainability in the next couple of decades, but that some more work should be done and sort of the monitoring network expanded for, again, these interconnected surface waters, groundwater dependent ecosystems. Those were also areas where we received a lot of comments from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service, and other NGOs. So again, this is an area where we want to try to strengthen our understanding, improve our network, and hopefully protection of these resources within the basin. And so LWA has been actively pursuing California Department of Fish and Wildlife funding for some of the other basins for which we provide technical support in the northern coastal region. So that includes Scott Valley, Sierra Valley, and also now Shasta. And so I think we're very close in Shasta to getting approval. And so there is still funding available, but staff at CDFW have made it clear to me that some of the sources of funding are shifting and that kind of timely submission was a big goal. So I am happy to share that for the interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystem study concept proposal that we prepared, we were able to submit that successfully earlier this week. And we have already received a response from CDFW staff requesting a meeting so that we can share more information about the project and have a conversation. And so with these types of concept grant proposals, we've seen that that's the kind of the typical course of the evaluation process. So CDFW, we anticipate, will be returning to us with additional questions and follow-up, and we will have the opportunity to respond, clarify, and refine the application. And so it's really, we feel very encouraged that we've already heard back from CDFW staff, and we look forward to meeting with them on Tuesday next week. So that will, Eric will be involved with that meeting as well. And so again, we'll have a chance to speak with the staff and interface with them and hear some of their feedback.
And Audra, if I can just jump in.
Yes, please.
It was really encouraging that they responded within like 24 hours. It was really fast. So that was great. And we already have a meeting next week scheduled to talk to them a little bit more. And then I actually had extra time today and I went and took pictures around Doolin, Mendocino, and Gibson Creek.
Wonderful.
So I'll be sharing that probably at a future board meeting just to show some of the areas we're looking at. So I think things are moving forward great.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you for sharing that, Eric. And one of the things I do want to mention that we highlighted in this grant proposal was the fact that Doolin, Gibson, and several of the other Western Hills creeks were identified in the National Marine Fisheries comment letter on the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan as areas of concern and interest for steelhead trout habitat that they felt were sort of under monitored, under evaluated. And so there is definite interest in understanding a little bit better what's going on with some of those Western Hills streams. And so that's really neat to hear that we got some photos. And to give, okay, so let's see, where are we? And so again, there's this tie-in with the acquisition grant proposal that I'm going to talk about next. And here for reference in purple are the existing open space holdings for City of Ukiah, and in red are the parcels in the Gibson Creek watershed and the Dooling Creek watershed, and actually in this case, intersecting a portion of Dooling Creek that are proposed for acquisition. And so we hope that as part of the plan we develop and the expanded monitoring network that is established, we can also be evaluating some of the positive impacts from restoration activities that occur in the Western Hills, and also inform potentially future targeted acquisitions. The city, as we understand it from communication with their staff, does hope to acquire several hundred more acres in the next 5 to 10 years. All right, and to give a sense for what our monitoring looks like at present, our monitoring network, excuse me, for interconnected surface waters, you can see here some of our wells. These include both wells that were part of the RMP water level network and additional wells in the monitoring network. We also have stream gauges that have been installed by the GSA and stream gauges that were installed by USGS. And many of these are outfitted already with continuous sensors, which is neat, so that we can have, again, that live data. So part of the concept that we're proposing in this grant is to get stakeholder and board input for how we should expand and develop the network. One of the other key comments that we received in comment letters for the Ukiah Valley Basin GSP was that we could do a better job characterizing the extent and types of groundwater dependent ecosystems within the basin. And so one of the very first tasks will actually be, again, if we are successfully funded, going through and having an aquatic biology firm do a really thorough reassessment of how we describe, characterize, and spatially identify groundwater dependent ecosystems. And we hope to also have tribal input as to what resources are considered particularly valuable and those that we might want to pay attention to, protect, and monitor through time. And so again, using stakeholder input, new information about the extent and coverage of GDEs, we hope to then develop an improved network and plan for how we're going to monitor the network through time, and do some additional assessments that leverage isotopic tools to get a bit more understanding of important sections of groundwater surface water interconnection. All right. And after conducting some of that baseline monitoring, some of the hope is that we can then take that new data that we've acquired on the ground through the monitoring network and some of the isotope studies and put that back into the integrated hydrological model to, again, improve it. Hopefully Laurel will also have some more data and information from her study that just got signed and funded, so that we can, again, be using all of this to update the model. And then another deliverable as part of this particular grant would be a guidance document of sorts examining different climate and Potter Valley Project Eel River diversion scenarios into the future using model runs. So saying, what might groundwater levels look like if we had these types of climate conditions, these types of eel river diversions to the Russian River, and this type of pumping, so that we can start to sort of inform what groundwater levels and, again, groundwater dependent ecosystems and interconnected surface waters might look like under those variety of conditions. And so that's a big hope to something useful that would come out of this grant. So an improved monitoring network, a plan for how to monitor that network through time, and then a guidance document using the updated model. So I went into a bit more detail since we had more time. Thank you for bearing with me, but please let me know if there are any questions at this stage.
Questions, board members?
All right.
Didn't, the last meeting,
Oh, Laurel, I'm so sorry. I cannot hear you. I don't know if it's mine.
was it last meeting, didn't we discuss the fees to submit for this grant that we were going to ask Ukiah to, what was the result of that?
The result of that is in the, to backtrack a little bit, there is a request that will go out to each member agency asking for the additional funds that we talked about in the past. And as part of that letter for the city of Ukiah specifically, I will request the additional funds for assisting this grant application for the Western Hills. As part of that letter is what I will do with that. Is what I discussed that with Sean and Doug. I am still discussing with them what a fair appropriate amount would be. It's not going to be a significant amount. It'd probably be pretty reasonable, less than $5,000 type of amount. But nonetheless, in the request, I will do it in the letter, so it's a formal request from the GSA to them, requesting for them to support this specific thing, in addition to the additional funds that everyone else is being asked to provide for each member agency. Yeah. Laurel, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the fact that one of the big considerations when looking at surface and groundwater interactions, as far as where we have the ecosystems that might depend on groundwater, is to look at channel geomorphology. As part of what we're doing, we will be doing a longitudinal profile of the Russian River, which really is what controls a lot of where the water ends up. So I don't know if it helps you to mention that in your meetings and such, but you might want to.
Laurel, I agree with you 100%
That's great.
on that.
Thank you, Laurel.
Yeah, I think that's so important that we take a look at that, because we're losing capacity for groundwater due to channelization. If there's anything that could in the future be done as a project to raise the level of the river by some sort of grade control structure, that would improve our conditions for storage, which is something long-term that we have to think about for water resiliency and the ability to store water when we have lots of it, and not all of it's going to fit into Lake Mendocino. That's pretty clear. So these are things that we need to be studying as a GSA.
I see Stephen and then Director White.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to emphasize that Sonoma Water would be happy to help participate in this effort. I know that we're working closely to develop scenarios for Potter Valley futures under a variety of potential scenarios. So if and how those inputs could be used in the Ukiah model to help develop the scenarios that you mentioned here, we would be happy to work with you on that. And then also, we would definitely be interested in providing input on any expansion of the monitoring network for interconnected surface water. And thank you. That's all.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. Director White.
So the expansion of the monitoring network is something that this grant provides for. Well, if we didn't have the grant, we'd just have some limited monitoring network, or there's no monitoring network?
Yeah, so actually I'm going to have Audra answer this one because you have the map up. And if you want me to pull up a bigger version of the map, just let me know. I'd be happy to share that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And please, I think board members, let us know if it looks very different where you are so that Eric can go ahead and do that. So we do have an existing interconnected surface water monitoring network that mostly leverages the wells that we have as part of our water level network. We also do have incorporated in that 2 stream gauges with continuous sensors that the GSA installed. And we have additionally some USGS gauges that were pre-existing in the basin. So again, we don't have coverage in some of the areas of potential interest. Like we'd want to expand definitely up in, I think, sections of Redwood Valley, capture a little bit more of what's happening with some of the major tributaries, and then also down in Western Hills. But we do have an existing network. It was just noted as being maybe, I don't want to, a good opportunity for expansion, let's say, was noted by DWR. They want to see, staff have noted that they do want to see consideration of expansion as part of our continued implementation.
So in the expansion, there's costs of ongoing monitoring. And
Yes.
does this grant carry forward ad infinitum, or at some point it'll end and then we'll just have a higher monitoring expense through the GSA?
No, that's a really good question. So it's expected to be a 3-year project. Is that correct, Audra? And then
Yeah, so
so over those 3 years, we would have those monitoring points. We had our monitoring network expanded. We would be collecting data, and one of the big objectives for the tie-in for the land acquisition project for the Western Hills is to collect data to see the benefits, and can we measure any quantified benefits from water quality, surface water flow, GD habitat, et cetera, to then help provide the case that the Western Hills land expansion is a good project and it should be expanded to continue protecting source water protection in the Western Hills. And then, but those monitoring data and points would then be included in our monitoring network. And so we have a couple of levers we can change. So we can change the frequency of monitoring to adjust costs. We can look at what that would be like for going forward, but not to deviate from this current agenda item. But at the workshop we will be having today on the rate and fee study, we could and we would incorporate costs related to monitoring as part of the rate and fee structure. So that cost would be incorporated. And just generally speaking, our monitoring costs are actually pretty low, I think, in general. And so even if we did have an expansion of the monitoring network, we will still have a representative monitoring point network, which will be what's officially the main points that we're continuously always monitoring. And then there's other extra monitoring points that we have more flexibility to define the frequency and how often. And then that would adjust how much cost would go into that as well. I see Laura has her hand up. So after Director White, any follow-up on that, we can. All right, Laura.
Yeah, I would be quick. Another way to think about this is this grant may give the opportunity to collect way more data than maybe what we had in mind. And then before the grant ends, we can really evaluate which are the critical points, so that then we really concentrate on for the ongoing monitoring for the GSP. We will just target the points that during this grant time and during this data acquisition really showed like, oh, these are useful, they're really telling us something that it's important for the GSP. So we can kind of see it this might be a larger effort, and then what goes into the representative monitoring network might still be a subset, depending on what we see while we do it.
I think that's a great point, Laura. And I think we're going to try to leverage continuous sensors wherever possible. That was written into the budget for the grant.
Thank you. Any other questions?
This is not an action item?
This is strictly an informational item.
Okay. Okay, last chance board before we move on. Okay, I think that's good.
So we have the Western Hills land acquisition update. So Audra, take that away.
All right, and I will be able to cover this, I think, in just a couple of minutes, since we are getting close to 2:30. So as we mentioned, we have been teaming with the city of Ukiah and receiving suggestions and materials from them that have aided preparation of this concept proposal. And they've also been able to review the materials we've assembled. I believe that the text of the concept proposal has been shared with the grant ad hoc committee and the preliminary budget. And in essence, this would allow for the purchase of nearly 200 acres of property in the Western Hills. Again, highlighted in red are the parcels under consideration. Their city has obtained willing seller letters for all of the parcels that are identified here. This would allow for, again, restoration as well. Some of these properties were subjected to trespass cannabis cultivation and have some disused outhouses, sections of dilapidated road, and so really provide an excellent opportunity for restoration of the watershed and recreational, sort of non-vehicle recreational opportunities for the community as well. And we're nicely filling in some of the existing land holdings for the city of Ukiah. And then also, this is sort of an ideal location for future expansion and public access from the valley floor. And so again, some of the key tasks that are included in this proposal are appraisal and then the title fee acquisition of the properties and the restoration after acquisition has occurred. The hope is also that there would be then an easement placed on the properties and we would change the land use type to prevent future development from occurring. And it does appear that the two sellers, if City of Ukiah is not able to proceed to purchase these properties, that they are interested in selling the properties for commercial development. And so again, this is an area where NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, expressed a lot of interest in terms of trout habitat and better evaluating some of the groundwater dependent ecosystems for Doolin, Gibson, and some of the other creeks in Western Hills. So we see this as a good opportunity for protecting GDEs and then also hopefully protecting the quantity and quality of source water that makes its way from the Western Hills down into the Ukiah Valley Basin. All right, so that's, again, materials are almost done being prepared, and we anticipate submission should be able to happen early next week.
And just to clarify that a little bit further too, the grant ad hoc committee is currently reviewing the draft application materials. LWA is refining the cost share part of the budget to make sure we have that as good as we can. And then once we get full approval from the grant ad hoc committee by either Friday, tomorrow, or next week, once we have approval, we will then submit, and then both the ISW study and the Western Hills land acquisition, both projects will be submitted, and we will then probably get another 24-hour response back, hopefully, and then we can move forward on further discussions on both of those. So.
Okay. All right, with that, we're ready to move on then to staff and GSA partner updates. Updates from General Manager Eric.
I have none, so I am going to defer to the next, which would be updates from GSA Legal Counsel and Holly.
Hello again, everybody. This is short, but as you may know, the it's so weird. I see two of myself. It's very disconcerting. The legislature just wrapped up their legislative cycle, and as you may know, I'm on the Association of California Water Agencies Aqua's Legal Affairs Committee, and no charge to the GSA, but as part of that, I keep an eye on pending legislation and have a vote on whether or not Aqua participates either for or against legislation, and we do things to try to help legislation be better through lobbying and comment letters so that they work better for water users and water agencies. So this is just a quick summary of what came out of the legislative cycle. As you know, we've talked before about Assemblyman Bennett had a number of pieces of legislation. Some of them specifically were about issues that we've been working on with Mendocino County in terms of taking the governor's executive order and making it more permanent. So in terms of that topic, his bill died in committee. So that was AB 1563, which would have prohibited a local agency from approving a project for a new well in a critically overdrafted basin without written verification from the GSA that the proposed well is consistent with the basin's GSP. We are not critically overdrafted, but it is relevant for us as a GSA to pay attention to what kind of additional sort of scope creep is happening for GSAs, because it could reach our level at some point. Similarly, AB 429 by Bennett would have prohibited a local agency from approving a permit for new groundwater well or for alteration to an existing well in a critically overdrafted basin if 1% of domestic wells go dry, unless specific conditions are met. So ultimately, committee hearings did not happen on those bills. It's entirely possible that this issue will come up again in the next legislative cycle. If so, we'll be paying attention to that as well.
And Holly, could I speak to that really quick?
Yes, please.
At a conference, directly from Director Bennett, he said he intends to bring it back if it dies. So I fully expect both of those to come back in the next legislative cycle, if he sticks to his word.
So it's not dead, it's just resting.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Eric is very active in the groundwater users. No, GRA. What does GRA stand for, Eric?
Groundwater Resources Association.
That's right. So that's really helpful. Between the two of us, you're pretty well covered for water policy nerdery in the state. So the governor did, however, sign Assembly Bill 799, which is by Assemblyperson Wilson. So that's regarding groundwater adjudications. Again, not something we expect to happen in your basin, but very relevant to what's happening in other GSAs statewide. And hopefully at some point, this is never relevant to you. But just briefly, when there's a groundwater adjudication, now courts are required to consider water use and accessibility of water for small farmers, as well as disadvantaged communities when they're making their judgments. And the GSA will receive pleadings and briefing materials from involved parties. And it also allows the court to refer groundwater adjudications to the State Water Resources Control Board for scientific expertise. It also adds measures to avoid overpumping of groundwater while the parties await a ruling. Groundwater adjudications can take years, sometimes a decade, to resolve. And then once the ruling is final, then there's an implementation phase, which is also often quite arduous. So,
and Holly, could I add another example? Sorry, this is like almost perfect. And this wasn't planned, by the way. There is one GSA in SoCal that did form, and because they had a GSP written, it did expedite the adjudication to happen within less than a year. So it is possible, if adjudication happens, that it could be faster because of a GSP was developed. But that's not typical, as Holly said. Usually takes a long time.
So just continue to count our blessings in having a high water table. Some sort of good news. There were 4 climate bond proposals. So those are climate resilience bonds, and whether or not you believe in climate change believes in you. So there's a lot of funding coming down the pipe in the form of bond money. It was moved from 2023 to 2024. So when the legislature reconvenes, in January, they're going to have until the end of June to negotiate a final version of a climate bond, which will be on the November 2024 ballot. Why should you care? You should care because bonds are an incredible way to get funding, and the funding will go into large programs like probably the IRWIMP program, for example. And so as we're considering our 5-year update, or we're writing project proposals or thinking about what we're doing as a GSA, the more we can tie groundwater sustainability to climate resilience, which it absolutely is, the more likely we'll be able to get those state and federal dollars that are tied to climate funding. So just something to be aware of coming down the pipe.
Holly, could I jump in one more time? Sorry.
No, bring it.
On the climate bond piece, there is a small GSA coalition that is formed. I am a part of it, and I've been trying to give feedback to that group. And so the intention of that group is to try to use the lobbyist that's being funded by a GSA that has money that they are willing to throw at it, to try to help get funding for small GSAs that under a certain pumping amount threshold or a certain DAC threshold, to try to get funding in the hands for those GSAs that really need it the most, versus those that are more likely to be more successful because they have the ability to potentially get more equitable fees and more fair prices across. So there is movement on that, and as stuff moves forward to where there is a real possibility that we can potentially get funding through that effort, I will definitely keep the board updated on that if that comes into play. But that, as you know, it really is dependent on the legislative cycle and how the lobbyists function and how that all works in the end. But that is something that is happening right now.
That's great. Thank you for spending time on that. So there's also a California Water Supply Solutions Act. So that's SB 659 by Assemblyperson Ashby. That would have required Department of Water Resources as part of the 2028 California Water Plan update and all future updates to provide actionable recommendations that result in the ability to develop additional groundwater recharge capacity. Groundwater recharge is something of interest in Sonoma County. I don't know that it's a huge issue at this point for us, but as the recent discussion showed, it's something to be paying attention to. So that passed out of the legislature. It's now on the governor's desk. Finally, something to pay attention to for next year, AB 560, another Bennett bill about groundwater adjudication again, would have required that parties to a groundwater management adjudication action submit a proposed settlement agreement to the State Water Board prior to filing it with the court for non-binding advisory determination regarding its impact on sustainable groundwater management and small and disadvantaged users and communities. So it didn't pass out of the Senate Appropriation Committee, so it became a 2-year bill. So key words that you're hearing over and over again in terms of funding, in terms of the legislature, in terms of what state agencies are interested in, disadvantaged communities, small farmers, rural communities, and climate. So these are all topics that are very relevant in Mendocino County and in our basin, and something we just need to continue to pay attention to and make sure that we're addressing proactively in our actions. That concludes your update. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from board members? Anyone in the audience or online? Devin.
Yes, good afternoon. Devin Bohr, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. Holly, just a quick question. When you've talked about some of the adjudication references, and maybe Eric can chime in as well, specific to groundwater, for those basins that have been listed with having potential surface to groundwater connectivity, are those adjudications moved into surface water rights?
So for groundwater adjudications, usually the connection there would be on interconnected groundwater GDEs, groundwater dependent ecosystems. So that's where that gets to the connection between surface water and groundwater. So basically, if you have a gaining or losing stream, if you're depleting the aquifer and it starts sucking water out of the streams, that's where the connection would come in to surface water rights. But typically, other than that, they're not directly connected under SGMA. But as we know, the hydrological cycle, it is all connected physically. So it wouldn't be a stretch for surface water issues to come up at a groundwater adjudication. So that's speaking very generally, not specifically about any particular basin. I hope that answered your question. If you want to talk about a more specific basin, we can do that offline.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to see if surface water rights have been pulled into groundwater adjudication. So it sounds like there's a possibility that could happen.
It's always a possibility, yeah.
Any other questions?
Good question, thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no further questions, then Holly, thank you very much for your update, which was quite thorough and very interesting. And looks like we can expect more of this to continue into the next legislative session. So,
yeah, never a dull moment.
Okay. All right, so next will be updates from DWR and SWRCB representative. Dominic, are you on the line?
Dominic, looks like you're off mute, but we cannot hear you. We can maybe come back to him at the end once he resolves his microphone issues.
Okay. Then we'd move on to updates from GSA partners on local projects, which is open to anyone who wishes to speak.
Rhode Valley County Water District is...
Yep. Go ahead.
Rhode Valley County Water District is in the process of drilling exploratory wells on Millview Water District's property that I haven't heard what the status is, but if it's positive, then we're going to drill a well that would supply Rhode Valley with domestic water from Millview. Then we have a draft agreement between our two boards that we're going to be looking at and voting on soon.
What volume of water would you be pumping?
We're looking, I've been told we need to hit at least 200, a well that would produce at least 200 gallons a minute.
Mm-hmm. And
more is better.
Total volume for the year?
In the past, which we've been, up until this year, we were only being supplied domestic water from Millview, and it was on a monthly basis 30 acre feet, which most of that was just the bottleneck was a physical bottleneck, was just a 6-inch pipeline that interties our two water districts.
Okay. So you theoretically could use up to 150 to 200 acre feet a year?
Yeah, we would only use it for domestic water. We have an ag system as well, but it would only be for domestic.
Okay.
So yeah, 300 or 400 acre feet a year.
Okay. Right, that's not a huge impact on the aquifer, but it is still significant, so.
Well, it gives us a little bit more water security.
Yeah, a lot more.
More options, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, shall we try Dominic again and see if he's...
Yes, I would just like to point out, we're right around time, but we can go another 5 minutes. I just want to make sure we have an adequate 10-minute break between the end of this part of the board meeting and the next part, which is the rate and fee study workshop. So with that, Dominic, I see you're on, and then we'll go to Laurel after that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So what Holly and you were talking about, Eric, is pretty relevant to what I'm going to talk about briefly. So we just had our California Water Plan plenary last week to discuss the draft update to the 2023 Water Plan. One of the speakers was Javier Silva, so it was an honor to hear him speak about his expertise and also to meet him in person. And to that point, this draft, it's a really short turnaround, but we're soliciting comments on it. And the comments are due in 1 week. So if you have time, it'd be great if anybody could including the public, give that a look. There's a table of contents in the front, so you can find the section relevant to you and provide comment. And it's not just an accounting of the water for the last 5 years, it's also a planning document. So to Holly's point about the 2024 water bond, it seems like there's a move to looking at watersheds instead of just, I don't know, smaller areas. And so I expect that might be relevant during whatever grant process comes out of a water bond if it's approved. So worth taking a look at for sure. And then relevant to what Audra Bardsley was talking about with ISW, we just released our fact sheet. And so in mid-November, we've been working on this, but it should be released in mid-November, an introduction to ISW fact sheet, as well as another fact sheet on techniques for estimating depletion of interconnected surface waters. And then in mid-December, we should be releasing examples of approaches for estimating depletion of interconnected surface waters. And then next August, we should have guidance for establishing SMCs for depletions of interconnected surface waters. So hopefully that's helpful to the work you're doing. And let me see if there's anything else pressing. Yes, so we have the Drought Resilience Interagency and Partners Collaborative meeting. That's 10 to 5, October 25th. So you can search DWR DRIP on Google. That should pull up the meeting information. You can join either in person or on Zoom. And I think given your short time, there's nothing else that's pressing. If anything comes up, I'll send Eric an email. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Laurel.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on this new Bureau of Reclamation grant, as we now have the signed contract. We do have a steering committee as part of this that will include a lot of agricultural people, because we need them to participate in order to model a lot of the effects of pumping on surface waters. But we also, I will go through Glenn. We will want a GSA representative and of course someone from the TAC as well. So this group will help to guide the scenarios that we eventually will evaluate with the Sigma model, because we will be taking what was done for the GSP and updating it significantly, adding in the river topography when we get that survey done, and then looking at the effects of different levels of pumping in different areas of the valley. So you will be hearing more.
Okay. All right. Is any further updates on local projects before we move on? All right, if not, then we'll move on to updates on compliance.
Sorry, Glenn.
Go ahead.
Just real quick.
Go ahead.
We've been talking about Mr. Silva, but Mr. Silva's not in the meeting, so I just wanted to see if he had anything to share.
Thank you, Holly.
Do you have anything to share?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. I'll put my camera on for a minute here. Thank you. No, I don't have much to share other than that. Yeah, thank you, Dominic. Met Dominic. It was good to meet face to face and participate in the IRWM 20 anniversary. Hopefully they fund that program some more and get that, keep that going, that collaboration. And so, but definitely here representing the tribes and tribal interests. So just want to keep that updated and working with y'all on keeping the tribes updated. So thank you, Holly. Thank you all for the time.
Yeah, well, thank you for the work you're doing to keep the tribes informed. That's real important. So appreciate that. All right, now we're ready to move on to updates on compliance process with the Executive Order N3-23. Marlena and Eric.
And Marlena, we have like 1 minute, so give us a really short, that would be
Speed
great.
it up.
Mendocino County. Don't have too much of an update, unfortunately. County Council has started a red line on the document, but we need to meet with Eric and work out some details, because their interpretation and ours on certain aspects would lead to some really big revisions in that document. So I'm hoping to get some time on the books soon, later on today.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have directors' reports.
I don't believe we do.
Probably don't have much time, but hopefully directors don't have much to say either, so. Oh, okay, and then on to future agenda items.
I'll make this really short and sweet. So we have the next meeting is going to be happening in January. We will have a regular board meeting component in the afternoon like we normally do. And then we are going to have a first evening public workshop on the rate and fee study. And that one, at both the board meeting and at the workshop in the evening that day, we will be discussing basically the pathway that we would like to take, whether that be Prop 26 or 218 or some type of hybrid version. So just make sure you have your calendars open for January. It is scheduled for January 11th. Is that correct, Indigo? Yes. So make sure we have that open. At the next board meeting, we will cover GSA compliance assessment update. So coming back to you with what Holly and I have worked on that. We will then be discussing a possible LWA contract amendment, a rate and fee the rate and fee study pathway discussion, which will be led by our consultants, Catherine Hansford Economic Consulting, sorry. And then monitoring updates, the water year 2023 annual report, the public workshop in the evening, and then any other consent items we have. So with that, I see Holly's hand is up.
Just briefly, I wanted to make sure the board knows that my colleague, also kind of a friend and mentor, Scott Morris, will be joining you for the second half of today. He has a lot of rate and fee study experience. He helped each of the Sonoma GSAs through their rate and fee studies, which are now in place and, you know, operating as they should. So in order to be really effective with your budget, I chose not to do it myself because he has more experience and he can help you more efficiently with that. So I will not be at the second half of the meeting, and instead you get an upgrade to my colleague, Scott Morris. If you do want me to participate, just let me know, but then you'll have 2 lawyers in one meeting.
Thank you, Holly.
Known as double jeopardy.
So I'm not planning to come unless you tell me otherwise.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to take a break for 5 minutes. Okay. All right. Thank you.
See you back at 3 p.m., everyone. Thank you.
Yo creo que si conozco a alguien que está próxima a ser mamá, lo primero que haría sería recomendarle el programa porque te entrega mucho apoyo, mucha información y más que nada como apoyo emocional, una guía, te da una visión diferente de cómo es ser papá aquí, quizás en este país.
Y así pues es un bonito programa porque pues es buena persona la señora y los ha atendido muy bien.
Pensé que nada más iba a ser un programa de orientación quizás para los nuevos padres, pero creo que nos llevamos una linda sorpresa porque Gaby es una persona muy cercana a nosotros, es como parte de nuestra familia, siempre ha estado dispuesta a ayudarnos y a escucharnos con nuestras dudas sobre la paternidad, y en nuestro caso, que estamos solos en este país, ha sido como de mucha ayuda.
Es un gran apoyo para nuevos padres, y más aún si están en nuestra situación, que somos extranjeros, que nuestra familia y amigos, como dice Carla, están en otro país, lejos. Entonces sí, viene muy bien el programa para apoyarse tanto emocional y como anímicamente, y bueno, en varios aspectos del programa que nos ayuda a seguir adelante con esta nueva aventura.
Te ayuda como a ver los distintos recursos que tiene la comunidad para nuevos papás, entonces creo que es de gran ayuda.
No queda mucho que agregar, pero lo veo de la misma forma.
Que hemos aprendido algunas cosas aquí y pues los han ayudado, como este programa los ha ayudado para seguir creciendo a la bebé, como con buenos consejos y así.
Sí, y creo que también ha sido muy importante el tema de apoyarnos con el libro y saber qué actividades hacer con Máximo de acuerdo a su edad, cómo estimularlo, cómo cuidarlo de los peligros de la casa, como cosas que uno como papá nuevo no conoce, claro.
Pues a mí me gustaría que lo siguiéramos visitando aquí en la biblioteca de Covelo. Está tranquilo y muy bonito aquí.
Cuando no nos podemos reunir, nos comunicamos por Zoom o una llamada telefónica o por texto.
Donde nos visite, porque ha sido nuestra casa, a veces nosotros vamos a Willits y puede ser en el parque. Gaby llega, hacemos un resumen de cómo ha ido nuestra semana o qué hemos hecho de nuevo, cómo va el trabajo. Luego hacemos las actividades del libro, vemos si podemos hacer un juguetito nuevo para Máximo, a veces ella lo evalúa, cómo está su sentido motriz, qué ha aprendido de nuevo, nuevas palabras, y jugamos un ratito y conversamos.
A mí personalmente también me ayudó mucho a obtener mi licencia a conducir, que era un objetivo que teníamos en cuanto a la familia,
sí,
para poder estar tranquilos, así que encuentro que ha sido fundamental el apoyo.
El objetivo del programa es que las familias estén bien, y que las familias estén bien significa niños felices, niños sanos, y eso en un futuro es adultos sanos y un mundo mejor. Entonces está bueno.
She has made me feel like I'm important and I can go at my own pace, and that's all you need sometimes when you're feeling like you got nobody.
It was helpful to have somebody there kind of holding my hand and guiding me and letting me know this is kind of the normal. It felt like I was becoming a new mom, so it was very interesting and helpful, very, very helpful.
You know, there was that self-conscious part of me, like, will I be accepted even though I'm not perfect?
What I like the most is that she really listens.
The support that she gives me is special because she does it with love, and it's just natural, you know. That's all I could say. It just feels like somebody that I've known since I was little.
You know, I said to Jeanette, you're supposed to be with me for 5 years. Jeanette said, yeah, I know, I'm going to be with you guys for 5 years. That's when I said, well, I guess I can trust her. She's going to be with us for 5 years.
Yo creo que quizás pasó como a la segunda visita o algo así, como que ya nos presentamos formalmente. Y luego ya creo que en la segunda visita estaba como todo más tranquilo, como muy, como que el ambiente era muy familiar. Entonces yo me sentí muy cómoda.
I felt like she cared for Sparrow too, and Sparrow really enjoyed it. Yeah, she knew when Gabby came we were going to be making something or learning something, and she'd instantly start digging through Gabby's bags to find out what activity we were going to do.
Not only did we get the assistance with this program, but we also made a really good friend. I'm happy to call Gabby our friend.
I think the relationship that we've built has been she's a part of the family.
which is the rate and fee study workshop, informational item.
With that, I would like to introduce Catherine Hansford. She is part of the Hansford Economic Consulting Team. And Elizabeth. She goes here as well. She's with KSN, who is working on the Hansford Economic Consulting Team. They're here to present on the potential, just more information on the rate and fee study, what other basins have done, what we've been looking at, some of the preliminary numbers, just general overview of everything to educate everyone on what we're doing and where we're going in the future. And I'm just very thankful for this team working on this. It's been really good so far. And with that, I will pass it off to Catherine.
Thank you very much. I would also like to add, as part of our team, we have Shailene Rollins, and Shailene is joining us remotely. She's not an active participant in the presentation, but she is here to answer any questions. And she was here in August, and she has prepared the outreach plan, so you have met her as well. Well, thank you for the introduction. So I'm Catherine, and Elizabeth is over here, and she's going to advance the slides for me. I wanted to be up here so I could see you. I felt like from over there I was looking into just a screen. So anyway, we're very pleased to be here. Elizabeth, you want to go on to our first slide? Yeah. So today, Eric gave you a little bit of an introduction. I just want to reiterate and stress that today is an opportunity to present on information and discuss. And as I say that, I would be happy if you want to interrupt me at any time during this presentation and ask me a question. It is noticed as a workshop, so don't feel like we're waiting to the end for Q&A. I know sometimes it's better just to ask a question as it comes up. So I'm going to give you an overview of the progress on the fee study to date. I'm going to talk about the overarching goals of the study, what are the different fee pathways and potential for different fee structures. I'll give you an overview of some fee structure lessons, also just some data and information from other GSAs, and I present a preliminary 5-year financial outlook, and then conclude with what type of fee would be best for the Ukiah Valley Basin, and what are the next steps in the study, and what are the schedule milestones that we need to be looking at. So to date, the board authorized the Hansford Economic Consulting Team to start work on this project in the middle of June. These aren't all in order, by the way, but things that have been done to date include the outreach plan. So Shailene Rollins presented that to the board and to the TAC on August 30th. That plan is complete. However, I would say it's kind of a living document in that we do update it. You know, if we know that there's additional people we need to be reaching out to, we will add that into the outreach plan. We have worked on development of the project and management actions from the GSP, which we we've actually sort of changed the label of that to GSP implementation items that you will see in this presentation. And that is an effort to look at what other project and management actions included in the GSP that we want to include, roll into this 5-year outlook that would be as part of the basis of the fee. And are there any additional items that should be included as well? And that's where KSN has really been helping out. A portion of their work is to work on the costs associated with those GSP implementation items. Also, KSN has worked on the development of an interactive web map for data interpretation and analysis. That map has been prepared. I'm not sharing it with you today, but it has got all the data sources incorporated into it. And we're using that to really analyze data, excuse me. And once the project is complete, we will have an interactive map that the GSA can put on your website and that people will be able to click on a parcel and see what information pertains to them with regards to the fee study. I have been working on case studies research, looking at different GSAs, both north and south in California, and seeing what's been working well, what hasn't been working well, are there any good lessons to be learned from those other GSAs, and that's complete. We've developed a 5-year budget. It's very much a preliminary budget at this point. I know that you have not seen the numbers and tables that go with that, but we're going to talk about it in broad terms today. And so here we are. This is our first workshop in October, and the goal is to get to adoption of fees by June of 2024. And I'm going to talk again at the very end of this presentation about what steps need to be taken in order to achieve that goal. So as part of this fee study, the overarching goals are we want to establish a fair fee structure that generates a sufficient, stable revenue stream based on best available data and developed information. We want to secure a fee structure that is adopted with maximum buy-in from the stakeholders, and we want to maintain transparency throughout the project. So we're going to talk about the different fee pathways that the GSA can go down. And I know you know a little bit of this from the scope of work that was approved, but I want to really explain it in full. So there are some specific SGMA financing tools that were authorized with SGMA and the additions to the water code that came with that. Then there are some general tools that can be used, and then there are some specialized tools. Specialized meaning that you have to be of a certain legal structure in order to use them, and as a JPA, you can use these tools. Some GSAs are formed such that they would not be able to use these tools, but you can. But they're also specialized in the sense that usually they only get used for very specific purposes and not just for a general fee. So to date, oh no, let's stay on that slide. So to date, the GSA has been using what's in that middle bucket, general tools, so contributions. This comes from members, GSAs contributing, and I don't know if you've had much in the way of partnerships yet, contributing, but that does happen too. You might work jointly on a project and have another agency provide that contribution to you. And grants, which you're working on, and debt. But debt is not something we want to be looking at least right now. The SGMA tools include regulatory fees, property-related fees, and then there's one specific one that was written into water code because of SGMA. It's called a meter installation cost recovery fee. So if you ever get to a point where you are requiring meters on wells and you, the GSA, puts the meter on the well, you can require that that property owner, well owner, pays for the costs of you having put that meter on the well. But we're not talking about that one today. I want to really focus in on regulatory fees and property-related fees. Regulatory fees, there's actually a couple of different kinds. One is under the umbrella of permits and inspections. And so these are the types of fees that typical agencies typically charge. A county, a city, a special district. For example, a sanitary district might charge to have an inspection on completion of a connection of pipe to the sanitary sewer line from a new home. A water company might charge for a meter on or off type fee. And it's generated when a customer is specifically requesting a service of the agency, and you are recovering the costs of providing that particular service. So again, we're not talking about that. That is certainly a type of fee you might want to look into in the future. There are GSAs that are adopting fees under this permits and inspections umbrella. But what you would be looking at is a government service or product type of fee. And the service that you're providing is groundwater management. Yes. Yes.
In relation to the executive order compliance related to well permitting, could that be part of that, potentially?
Part of the permits and inspections fee?
For like well permitting review and compliance with a law, that could be around an inspection or permitting review.
Yes,
yeah.
Certainly you could recover that cost, yes. But again, it's a little bit of a different, I think to keep it really clean, you would want to set that up as a separate type of a fee. And then property-related fees, this is also granted in the Sigma code. It's different because it's providing service to parcels, and the law looks upon it differently. You have to go through the implementation process differently. And I will explain that in the next slide a little bit better. Quickly on the right-hand side, these specialized tools, which we are not focusing on, but I did want you to have this for your record. It might be something you come back to in the future, is having special taxes, which you need to obtain 2/3 of the electorate positive vote toward having special taxes. They can be challenging to do. Assessments, I think, are very problematic because once you have an assessment in place, you have to go through a balloting process every time you want to change it. So if you want to increase it from, let's say, $10 an acre today, and you need to increase it to $20 an acre in 2 years' time, you will have to go back through a balloting process. And unlike a special tax that requires a 2/3 affirmative vote, it requires a majority affirmative vote. Assessments, they're special districts in of themselves, and they can be great when you have a particular project that you want to fund. But we're not focusing on that today. And then finally, there's tax increment, which you can do if you have a city or a county that's involved with an enhanced infrastructure financing district, which we're also not going to be looking at. But I want you to at least know these are the tools in the toolbox that you have. We are focusing right now on regulatory fees and property-related fees, but you might in the future come back to this slide and think, what other tools do we have? Okay. So the fee pathway, and Eric had mentioned it before, we're really focused on is this, do we go down a Proposition 26 path or do we go down a Proposition 218 path? And I want to explain that really how you choose this is largely based off of what it is based off of what you intend to do with the fee money that you collect. So let's look first at regulatory activities. A Prop 26 fee in this context can only fund regulatory activities. So this could include reporting to DWR on mandated items. Your annual reports, for example, are a mandated item. You might be documenting well and pumping activity. You are conducting studies and running different programs. You're looking to fill the data gaps. You might be adding monitoring wells, you might be adding weather stations, and so forth. You might have inspections and enforcement of regulations that are adopted by the GSA specifically. And then you're going to have some general program administrative expenses.
Which one do we fall under?
Well, I'm going to talk about that as I go through this. So to date, from what I've seen, everything that you have in the next 5 years falls into a regulatory activity. But I want you to be armed with the information and in January make a decision. Because even though the data that I see today says a Proposition 26 fee is probably all you need for some time, there may be some very interesting information that comes out of our stakeholder outreach, which we'll be doing in the next 2 months. So I don't want to say to you today, you should do a Proposition 26 fee, because not all the data gathering has occurred, and not all the discussion has occurred with your stakeholders.
So, if you want me to do this, I will. Oh, I am. So, would Prop 218 include regulatory and management?
Yes.
And then Prop 26 is only regulatory?
Correct.
Director White. You're good.
When I saw the list of regulatory activity, that sounded exactly like what we do. And assuming that someday we want to get bigger in doing that, which as far as I know, the law only requires us to do that. Do you have the ability to, in other words, are you locked in for life on any of this?
No, you are not.
Okay.
There are several GSAs, and I was going to address that in the case studies, but there are several GSAs that have started out with a Proposition 26 fee, and then as they have done their investigative studies and they've evaluated different pathways for achieving sustainability, they have then identified certain projects, capital type projects that they need to do, and then they have gone to a Proposition 218 fee. You can have both. You could have a Prop 26 fee in place and keep it going in perpetuity and add a Prop 218 fee. I'll also add, you could have your Prop 26 fee be for the entire Basin Valley, and you could have a Prop 218 fee that only applies to a certain portion of the valley in the future. So if you have a project that only benefits, let's just say Redwood Valley, for example, then you could have a fee that is only applied to Redwood Valley.
Any other follow-up questions to clarify 26 or 218?
So I know Prop 218 is very specific about when you collect a fee, what you can use it for, as far as who benefits from it, right? And you can't spend that money on anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's very selective. Is that the same for Prop 26?
In intent, yes, but there are some differences, and actually, I think that might be my next slide. Is it? Or the next one after?
Oh, okay.
No, it's a great question, and I do want to answer it. Okay, so I think this slide actually gets to your question. So what we've already talked about the top one, capital projects. Regulatory fee cannot fund those, but the 218 can. The second one I had was nexus. So what's that relationship? What is it? And this comes down to a legal nexus. And if you have any questions for Scott, he's here. So under the Proposition 26 fee, you have to demonstrate reasonableness. You have to demonstrate that you are charging a reasonable amount for the regulatory activity that you are going to do with the fee that you collect. And you need to demonstrate that that is a reasonable amount in relation to the benefit that those fee payers are getting from paying the fee for that activity, okay? So it's really a test of reasonableness. But Prop 218, you have to, A, still demonstrate reasonableness, but there are 5 requirements you have to meet. And I know you will be familiar with this because every water district that adopts new fees, or you might call them rates, has to go through this. And you have to provide a cost of service study. The cost of service study has to demonstrate 5 things: that the revenues shall not exceed the funds required to provide the service, the revenue shall not be used for any other purpose than why you are imposing the fee, that the fee is an incidence of property ownership, and the fee cannot exceed the proportional cost of service attributable to the parcel. The service must be used by or immediately available to the owner of the property charged, and 5th, that the service is not available to the public at large. There are GSAs that have completed cost of service studies and that have adopted fees that feel that they meet each of these 5 requirements. So it's doable. I would say there's still some gray areas there, legally, perhaps, but you can ask your legal team for an opinion on that. But certainly it's doable. But you do have to demonstrate more than you do the Prop 26 fee. It's all still the same basis. You're still not going to be charging a fee that covers more than what you need to spend that fee on. And Sigma does say specifically what you can spend the money on. So it still has many of the same underlying principles, Prop 218 or Prop 26. It's just with Prop 218 you have to really demonstrate it through a document, this cost of service study, how you are achieving these 5 things. Yes?
So item 5 on 218 is service not available to the public at large. What specifically does that mean?
Well, that's one I think is rather tricky. In a usual rate study, it would mean that you wouldn't be charging it for, say, ambulance service because it's not an incident of property ownership. The ambulance goes wherever is needed, right? Police, it's a response to an incident. Whereas water and sewer, you have physical facilities that connect you to the service provider. It is an incident of property ownership that you are being charged the fee.
I see.
Demonstrate reasonableness, that seems really subjective. And so who ultimately makes the decision that it is reasonable? Is it the public when they vote on it? Or is it someone else? Is it this board?
It's the board.
Okay.
With stakeholder input, certainly. Whatever fee ends up being constructed will be based on stakeholder input and your input and the tax input as well. But ultimately, the board is the one that adopts the fee. And in adopting the fee, you're stating that it's reasonable. And your resolution will have some wording to that effect.
When you adopt a fee, can you also adopt within that ballot measure future inflation? So that you'll have a fee and then future, if there's 3% inflation, that it'll go up.
Yes, so you are right ahead of me. That's the next slide. So let me just finish this
I'm
slide.
magical.
No, it's fantastic. You're like anticipating the very next thing. So under the Prop 26, you need to notice that there will be a public hearing, and you have to make that notice at least 20 days before the hearing, and you have to make all the materials available upon which you are basing your proposal of the fee available to the public. And so you have to advertise a hearing in the newspaper. You have to state where a customer, interested person can go and get more information. You have to post all the information on your website. These are all legal requirements. With a Proposition 218 fee, your only legal requirement is that you have to mail a notice to every single property owner of record or parcel owner that was on the last equalized roll from the county's records at least 45 days before the public hearing. So if you go down a 218 route, which we allowed for both in our proposal, you incur a lot more costs in your noticing than you do for a Prop 26 fee.
And just to add to that, a 218 route could potentially extend the timeline for the project as well versus a 26.
It could potentially, yes. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next slide, because this is really what Board Member McGinley was getting to. Okay, so for Prop 26 fee, there is no vote, there is no ballot. You as a board hold the public hearing, you listen to the people who come and state their comments, their concerns, etc. And upon close of the public hearing, you can either choose to move forward with what you propose with the fees or not, but that's your choice. And you can adopt by resolution or by ordinance. And I would leave that to your legal team to decide which is best for you. Under Prop 218, again, no vote, no ballot, but the property owners can protest. And they have one protest per parcel. So if you have 2 people living at a property, only one protest counts. If you have a tenant at a property and a property owner, and they both send in protests, one will have to be tossed. If you, upon the close of the public hearing with the 218, if there is not a majority protest, meaning if you don't have 50% plus 1 protest, you can move forward with your proposal. With a Prop 218 fee, what you adopt are maximum fees. And usually, agencies will adopt a schedule for a certain time period. It's often 5 years. It doesn't have to be 5 years. It could be 6, 7, 8 years, whatever is appropriate. It could be 3. But if those maximum fees are adopted each year, you could reevaluate your situation and you could adopt a lower fee for that year because you've already had the authorization to do that. One little twist is if you adopt a fee and then decide to index it. So say you index it to the CPI or you index it to a construction cost index, for example. If you do that, you can only index for 5 years. And then it stops. And you would have to go back and do another Prop 218 process. So you either set however long you want with the maximum fees you want, or you set one up with an index knowing that 5 years is the maximum you can go with that indexed fee. All right, so on the Prop 26 side, you can adjust the fee whenever you want to. You have to follow the California Constitution. So you have to follow exactly the same things as you did the first time you adopted it. But it's a much simpler process. So if you had a fee, for example, $10 an acre foot of extraction, and then the next year you realize it needs to be $20, You just go through the same process. You hold the public hearing, you make the documents available, you hold the public hearing, and you can adopt a new fee. You can also index a Prop 26 fee. There's no limit on that, unlike the Prop 218 fee. So I do recommend that you have an annual inflation adjustment that would automatically kick in for the next year. You can always review it as a board and decide it's too high, it's too low, and hold a public hearing and set it at the fee level it needs to be. But if you have an automatic adjustment, it's kind of like a safety backstop so that you're at least keeping up with inflation. Yeah.
You threw out a hypothetical $10 acre foot. Is that the only thing that you can use for a fee, is the acre foot? Can you do acres?
Yes. Yes, and we're going to look at that too. Any more questions on the difference between a Prop 26 fee pathway and a 218 fee pathway? Okay. All right, so now we're going to go to the fee structure options. All right. Well, for those of you who have adopted rates, been on a board that's adopted rates, you'll be somewhat familiar with this. But as we develop a fee structure, we do have certain goals that we want to keep in mind. So looking at this depiction, one is defensibility. So you want to make sure that whatever methodology you choose for this fee, that it demonstrates reasonableness of the fee and the amount per the California Constitution. And you might seek some legal advice on this, but we as a team, and I'll include Scott, is that we want to make sure that whatever you end up with is defendable. So that's one key goal. Next, financial stability. As with any rate fee study, the goal is that you have sufficient revenue and that it is predictable. So we want to have confidence that this fee structure will produce the anticipated revenue stream that you need. Third, we want equity. 100% equity is not achievable. And so when people talk about equity, I think people have some slightly different definitions of what that means. I would say that it ensures that all parties have been given an equal opportunity to participate in the process, that their voice has been heard in the process, and that it has been taken into consideration in setting up the fee structure. And you all will be asked at a future point in time what you think is a more equitable fee structure when we do some ranking of different structures that you can do. Enforceability, this is the ability to collect the fee that's based on reliable data. So it wouldn't be very good if you set up an extraction fee and you didn't really have information on where the wells were or really how much was being pumped, and you just said, we just want you to self-report it. Well, really, how enforceable is that? So it needs to be something that administratively is truly achievable and enforceable. And that leads to simplicity as well. We don't want to have a fee structure that is overly burdensome on your administrative staff. It needs to have functional ease. So we want to keep your administrative costs down in doing this every year. I am an administrator for 2 other GSAs, and every year I do their property tax bills spreadsheet that I send to the county to put onto the property tax with their fees. And it's a lot of work every year, and the simpler you can keep it, the better. It will cost in consultant costs to have help to put this together every year. And so I do think that's a key consideration for you. And finally, understandability. It's no good having a fee that you are constantly trying to explain to your customer base. You want to be able to explain it succinctly, people to understand its purpose, why it is the level it is, what it's going to fund, and why that fee structure makes sense. Okay. All right, so here are the fee structure options that have been identified to date by various GSAs. And I'm going to talk about each of these, actually on a slide or two. But first of all, there's a wellhead fee. That's just a fee based off of your well. And it could include a fee that's based off of characteristics of your well as well. So it could be very simple. It could be a little bit more complicated. A parcel fee is what we're talking about, is a flat fee for every parcel that the GSA serves. An acreage fee, as it sounds, is dependent on the acreage of the parcel. A point of connection fee is something that could only be charged to parcels that are receiving water service from a system. So a domestic well would not be a point of connection. But if you're part of either a public or a private water system, and I'm including small water systems where you might only have 2 or 3 parcels served off of one well, they would all have a point of connection. And then you can have a hybrid. So you could have a combination of these different fee concepts. And you might want to do that because it might make sense if you have some different types of customers. It also might make sense simply based off of the type of data that we can use that's really good, reliable data. So my goal with this is that between now and January, we will be holding a lot of stakeholder interviews. We will be looking harder at the data. We've already started looking at the data, but harder, and really seeing what realistically of these options could you use. And come back to you with 3 fee structures, 3 concepts. And we will then be looking for your input on those 3 different ideas. Yeah.
Catherine, since Javier is on the line, could you also speak to the tribal engagement that we will do, and then also how that relates to the rain fee study?
Yes. So Javier, glad you're here today. We will be reaching out to you, and we do want to talk with each of the tribes that could be affected by this fee. We would like your guidance as to how we conduct that outreach. We would love it if we could have tribal representatives meet with us either together, or we could arrange it on one day where we come and meet with you. We're happy to come to each of the rancherias and lands that you're on to talk about the fee and how it might impact you. Something that is embedded in SGMA's law is that the federal tribal lands that are held in trust, those parcels cannot be charged the fee by law. However, there are many tribal members who own parcels of land that are not, they own them themselves, so they're not part of the federal trust lands. And those parcels can be charged the fee. So there certainly will be members of the tribal communities that can be charged the fee. So we really will look to you as a starting point as to how we go about talking to each of the tribal nations.
And if I could just add one more point, Holly did mention to us that the board does have the ability to look at and evaluate whether or not they will want to charge parcels that are not held in trust, and consider not charging any lands that are held by any tribe member, regardless if they're in trust or not. So that is something that the board could consider as an option as well.
Yes, and that is certainly true. And I think as you evaluate that kind of an option, that's where you really have to evaluate that equity goal and think about everybody paying or having a, because at that point, if you make an exemption, what is the basis of your exemption? So yes, it's certainly true, you could make an exemption, but it's something to think about in the context of fairness and equity of everybody paying. Great, okay.
Yeah, feel free to get a hold of me at any time and willing to meet and discuss about it. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
to
No, I appreciate it. No, this is a workshop. If anyone else, well, actually, I don't know, Chair, how you would like to take any other comments, but I was certainly open to the board stopping me at any time. But
This is a small enough group, I think that we can, if you're okay with us stopping the presentation, I
Yes.
think we can do that.
yes, certainly am. Okay. All right, so once a fee pathway has been selected, so again, go back to January is our goal to select whether you're moving forward with a Prop 26 or a Prop 218. The main reason why we're saying January is because a Prop 218 fee requires more lead time. It could still be doable by June, but if you back up, remember I said it, you have to have at least 45 days of mailing a notice. So if you go back 2 months from June, you're in April. And time flies. And I think a 218 fee could become a very stressful situation that you really don't want to be in with a fee. You want to be very measured and thorough and be very confident that you're doing the right thing when you adopt a fee. With a Prop 26 fee, you will have plenty of time to develop that fee between January and really April, May timeframe. And then in June, you're really just adopting the resolution. You would have already adopted the fee study at a prior meeting, whether it's April or May. And June is really just the formality of the public hearing and executing that resolution. Okay, so once that fee pathway is determined, we're going to ask both the TAC and the board to participate in a ranking exercise. Although the board certainly has the ultimate say in what that fee is going to be, we really do want to ask the stakeholders, and the TAC will represent a lot of those stakeholders too. And I think it would be helpful for you as a board to have the TAC's ranking as well on the fee structures. So we want to ask both of you for that. And the ranking exercise is used to weight the fee structure goals according to stakeholder input and to score the fee structure options according to those goals. If it becomes just absolutely obvious which fee structure is the right one for you, we may not do a ranking exercise. But it's highly, I'd say it's pretty likely that you will end up with at least 2 fee structures that you're seriously considering. So I think you will end up with this ranking exercise. And when I say weight the fee structure goals according to stakeholder input, this will be based off of those fee structure goals: defensibility, equity, simplicity, understandability. What percentage would you know, how important is equity? And I've done this in the past, and that's usually the one that ranks the highest. Because people usually think if you've gotten to that stage, then you've passed the defensibility test. So simplicity, understandability, that's what I'm talking about with weighting. And then scoring, you would have the first fee structure, and you would give it a score, say for equity. Let's just say 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. You'd say this fee structure scores at 5 on equity. But you might say it's only a 2 on understandability, because it's going to be a nightmare to explain this to people. And we'd do that for each of the fee structures. What's nice about doing a ranking exercise is it gives anonymity, but you usually end up at a consensus. So it does help the board. You don't have to go by it, but it can really help the board to steer to a conclusion on the fee structure.
So 3 fee structures, is that just kind of tradition, or is there a logic behind it?
No, I think you don't want too many. And if there's only 2 good ones, I'll only present 2. I mean, I'm hoping that there'll be 3. I've found 3 at one GSA. I only had 2 at another GSA. It so much depends on what the data tells us. It's very, very data-driven and stakeholder-driven as well. And much of that stakeholder input is about equity. And there's always trade-offs. So there might be a fee structure that really hits high on equity, but the data's just not developed enough yet. And maybe in 10 years' time, you might have great data and you can support that type of fee. You can switch to that other kind of fee. We've talked about that. I've worked in the Salinas Valley for several years and helped them develop their fees, and we've morphed their fees over time. And that's a Prop 26 fee. You have the flexibility. You're not stuck in one fee structure forever. Okay, so actually this is kind of what I was talking about on that last slide, is that this says example, and I mean it is just an example because you might end up with a hybrid fee structure, but let's say, for example, you had an acreage fee. We would go along the columns and we would look at defensibility and give it a ranking. And I put some ideas into this table so that you could see what kinds of things I'm thinking about. So I'll give you an example. Okay, so acreage on the understandability is really strong for irrigated acreage and for any parcel that would use water. Would you have it on a parcel that doesn't use water today but could use water? That's the kind of question that that's the fine tuning that we'll get into. But for now, this is truly an example. Don't take it home and say, Catherine says this. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how we can work through what makes the most sense for you. And again, after we have talked to the stakeholders, we'll have a better idea of what kinds of things we might put into these boxes. And we also use the case studies. So for an extraction fee on the financial stability, what I found is that that's proven to be a weak system for other GSAs because they thought that there was, okay, I'm again pulling a number out of the sky, they thought there was 100,000 acre-feet of pumping in their valley, and they got the reports in, and there was 70,000 acre-feet of pumping. And so their fee doesn't cover what they thought. And then they've had to do supplemental fees on top of that. And you have drought years, and you have wet years. And if you're looking for financial stability, extraction fee ranks the lowest out of these. So these are the kinds of things we have to think about. If you're talking about understandability, and an extraction fee is extremely understandable. The people pulling the water out of the ground are the people who pay, right? So, and it can look a little formidable looking at all these choices on this table right now, but when we actually look at what data you have to work with and we talk to people, I really think that something will come out that stands out. And it could be a hybrid type fee, and there could be 2 or 3 ideas that stand out. Okay, any other questions? And I have no idea how I'm doing on time, but. Okay.
Oh, I realized I didn't have my microphone on. We have a question from Devin. Devin.
Yes, thank you. Devin Bohr, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. Just a quick question, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but do you have any comparative information for cost of implementation to the GSA for these different methodologies?
Well, start out with, oh, you mean actually to administer each of these different methodologies each year? You mean like an ongoing cost of the fee?
correct, either ongoing or, an established cost, for doing some of these different processes?
No, I haven't specifically developed that, but I mean, yes, I do know. It's, no, not to discuss today. But that is something that will be presented as a consideration.
And then to speak to the time factor, we have 38 minutes. So you're about more than halfway through.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the case studies. I'm not getting into detail with this presentation, and I'll tell you why with the final slide of it. But let's just start out with the GSAs I looked at. So I looked at 22 in total. And I'm actually counting Sonoma County, which has 3 GSAs, as one, meaning like it's one case study, even though there's 3 GSAs within it. Same thing with Madera County, and the Cosumnes Water Authority actually has 6 GSAs within it. But I'm just looking at each as one case study. So 13 in the north and 9 in the south. There are various different types of governance amongst these. Those with a star are JPA, like yourself. There are a couple that are special district acts. There are a couple that are formed under interlocal agreement. So there are 2 or 3 of these that are just county GSAs. So they're in the county, I guess you call them white land areas, where it's outside of a jurisdiction of an irrigation district or a water agency, for example. All right, so up in the north, ranging, I'm calling the Merced, San Joaquin area, Northern California. So ranging from that sort of mid area to Salinas on the coast and up into the Butte County area. Okay. All right. So in terms of fee pathway, 20 of these 22 case studies use a Sigma financing tool. So if you remember back in that early slide, I said you can have a Sigma tool that's specifically in the water code. It's a Prop 26 or a 218 fee. And then you have some specialized tools. So there's a couple that use their specialized tools, but the vast majority have just gone with what Sigma has authorized them to be able to do. 10 of these case studies at least started with Proposition 26 fees. So there were 3 of them that adopted a 26 fee just to get them on their feet, to develop a GSP, and then they adopted a 218 fee. And then 10 of them just off the bat adopted 218 fees. I will say I feel like those numbers kind of skew your perception because you just look at the numbers and you think, oh, it's half and half. Well, the ones that have adopted 218 fees are the ones that are almost all, if not all, agriculture, irrigated lands. And so a Prop 218 fee is really quite straightforward for them. They're not dealing with as many landowners and parcels, and there's more likely to be consensus, or there's less likely to be diversity of opinions because they're all growers. So, so I think the numbers alone don't really do justice to what that might mean, but it just shows that that both pathways have been used. In terms of structure, 7 of the GSAs, remember I'm counting Sonoma as one GSA, which is really 3, have extraction-only fees. 10 of them have acreage-only fees. 3 of them have an acreage fee, but they've excluded those areas that are served by water systems, and they've made an agreement with the water systems that they will pay a lump sum amount each year for their share. Just basically continuation of a member contribution, so they don't pay the fee. And then 2 of them have a hybrid fee where there's been maybe a portion of it's based on acreage, a portion might be based on a parcel fee, portion might be based on connection fee. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, in terms of collection, 15 of those GSAs with an acreage or a hybrid fee have them collected with property taxes. So, so that you're aware, you have the authority to charge a fee that you collect yourselves, or you have a third party collect for you, or SGMA allows you to request that the county place the fees onto the property tax bills. So you'd have to work with the county for that to happen. I have not heard of a county that has not allowed fees to be put on the property tax bill. Yeah.
I know that our county is going to ask for a cost recovery if we do it.
Yes, they all do. Yes,
Okay.
and they differ. We know what Mendocino County's is, so it's 2% of the fee that's charged. That's very typical. Some do it on a per parcel basis, some do it as a percentage of the total fee, but it is something that has to be factored into the cost projection. And one GSA that has extraction fees collects with property taxes, and I did kind of highlight that point here on this slide, that those 3 Sonoma GSAs, that's the only GSA case study that places extraction fees on property tax bills. So all the others that have extraction fees, they collect the charges themselves. And typically, that's done through a web portal. And the ones it looks like the majority of those, they have a reporting form that the well owner places the information, how much was pumped, they'll have the meter reads on there, how much was pumped, multiply it by the fee, show the amount that they owe, and they will upload that, and then they will go into a portal and pay with a credit card. There's probably an option for a bank account withdrawal, I don't know that, but anyway, they pay through a web portal, and I don't know that they all do that, but that's what I saw seemed to be the most prevalent way of doing it. Another point with regards to collection, we'd already talked about federal lands and tribal trust lands that are that they're federally held tribal lands that are exempt from the fee by law. Also exempt from the fee are what we call de minimis users. Those are domestic users of water with their own well that use less than 2 acre-feet of water per year, estimated less than 2 acre-feet of water per year. So SGMA says that domestic well owners shall not be charged the fee unless the board decides to regulate them. And the reason why GSAs will regulate domestic well owners is if they have a significant impact on the groundwater table. So there are, well, I worked with one GSA where there was a very large concentration of domestic wells. It was really a subdivision where they were allowed to put in their own well on every property, even though that they were not very large parcels. And so looking at equity, it didn't make sense that other people on a water system who use same amount of water, why would they pay and the domestic well owners not pay when they're both using the same amount of water from the groundwater table? So when you have cases like that, GSAs will regulate. And regulate could mean kind of the spectrum of what I've seen, and I do think very much that you need to ask for a legal opinion on this. It can range the gamut from a resolution that simply says this GSA is regulating all de minimis users within its service territory, to a well registration process where you're saying we regulate you because we're going to require you to register your well with us. So I worked with the GSA where they felt really comfortable just saying we're regulating you without any kind of program to kind of back that up as to how they're regulating them, and to knowing that Sonoma did a full registration program. And I think that's something that we'll need to really talk about as we develop this fee. There are a few GSAs that regulate the de minimis users, but they don't charge them the fee. Those are extraction-based fees, where they want to know how much is being withdrawn from the groundwater table by getting those meter reads, but they don't charge them the fee. That's in Southern California that I've seen that. So, any questions on that piece? Okay. And then finally on this slide, I just talk about the lands that are charged, so not extraction fee based, but 12 of them had a charge, at least had like a base fee to it. So there's kind of a difference in thoughts between GSAs that I've seen. Some GSAs feel like if you own property that is above our basin, that in some way, shape, or form, whether you're taking water today or not, you are benefiting from the fact that the basin is being managed sustainably into the future. And therefore, you should pay something, some minimum charge for that. Other GSAs have taken the approach, you should only pay a fee if you are currently using that to irrigate or you are a user of a water system. Yes, Eric.
We have a question online. Devin?
Yeah.
Thank you, Devin Bohr, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. You just answered this partially, but maybe some additional clarification. So within the 12 GSAs that charge all land, there's no designation of groundwater use, it sounds like. It's just a base fee based on geography. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And then for the three that have gone sort of the irrigation route, have they made the distinction that those specific parcels are indeed using groundwater versus surface water for irrigation? Has there been that distinction?
No. So, so I've worked in the Salinas Valley, and they have very much an interconnected system there too, because they have the Salinas River that runs through the middle of the valley, and they have many groundwater wells that are alongside the river and certainly are using river water, extracting river water via the ground, right, through the interconnection. But still, they are using groundwater. So we discussed, should there be any consideration of properties that use surface water, and the growing community said to us, no. They said, if we're using groundwater wells or we're irrigating our land in the Salinas Valley, in some shape or form, it's interconnected. The groundwater, the surface water is interconnected. And they felt that that would be a really bad path to go down. And another place where I worked, they certainly did irrigate with surface water, but the irrigation district supplemented that supply of surface water with groundwater, particularly during the, well, I'm going to say it wrong, the wetter years, the dry years. So, but there were certain years, I don't want to make a fool of myself here, certain years where they're using groundwater more than in other years. And you know, to talk about simplicity and not wanting to get too complicated with this, again, the stakeholders came back and said, we're all using groundwater in some shape, form, however we're getting it, but we're all using it. So I think you could also say, what about recycled water in certain areas? You know, should you get a credit for recycled water? And this is where I say, well, again, you got to go back to what are you using the fee money for? Okay, if you're doing Prop 26 type activities, these are investigative studies, these are meeting regulatory requirements, creating programs, then what you're doing is creating something that's of benefit to all. And so does it really make sense to be trying to make credits for things like, you might want to start looking at things like recycled water, environmental uses of water. What is each parcel really getting? But from my experience working with stakeholders and a lot in the agricultural community in Salinas Valley Basin, the consensus sentiment was, we are working on regulatory activities, we're learning more about our basin, we're learning more about our groundwater supply, and in that sense, we should all be contributing to that increased knowledge and how we can manage the basin. So again, I'm going to come back to how important the stakeholder input will be in the next couple of months, and to not get too ambitious with a fee that can become overly complicated for what you're really trying to achieve in the next few years.
Devin, did you have a follow-up to that?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Eric. I guess part of my question had to do with sort of duplicative fees, perhaps, in terms of surface water rights holders pay fees on an annual basis to the State Water Board. If they're going to be included in this, there could be some challenges there, perhaps. And then, you know, how would an irrigation district, for example, that might be charging, you know, a water use fee, also be sort of a duplicative effort if Sigma and the GSA is charging a duplicative fee for that water use?
Yeah, and I don't have any answers for you on that today. That's going to be part of our investigation and part of what we look into in this fee
assessment. You know,
Yeah.
There could be some complexity there as well.
Yeah, and to your comment about duplicative, I think we have to remember that we're talking about fees for the GSA in what we're trying to achieve, regardless of the State Water Resource Control Board or anyone else imposing a fee for whatever they're trying to do. It's separate from us. So that's sort of where we land, I think, at the end of the day on that particular duplicative part.
Yeah, and really quickly, Eric, I was just sort of trying to give you foreshadow a bit of the comments you might get from some of the stakeholders on the fact that they are already paying fees or different rates at this point in time. So just a comment that you'll probably receive.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I'm, you know, again, trying to think about this in a big picture sort of way. So we, if I understand it right, we're taking out about 5,000 acre feet per year for irrigation, about 2,000 acre feet for domestic use. So really, if you go with the concept that the user should pay, that's the amount of water that is being extracted that you would use as a basis for assessing. And there's other people who are using surface water who we know it's not coming out of the ground. They probably are affecting groundwater in some respects on the basis of flow of the river through the region. But if they're going to be asked to pay pretty soon, which I think they are, substantial amounts of money to use that water, that's where I could see some conflicts coming up if this is going to be like an additive fee on top of that.
And that's the type of input that Catherine and her team are going to try to gather as much as possible, so that way they can gather those themes and then bring it back to, here's what we heard, what do you think, these are the pathways that make sense.
And the big water budget is somewhere around 20,000 acre feet of water is used in the upper Russian River system. That includes Potter Valley. So if we take Potter Valley out of that, then it starts to come down to, for sure we know about 8,000 acre feet is coming from flood control, 5,000 acre feet is coming out of the ground, and then there's people who, like me, have appropriative rights that are also using water, but we don't have a real clear picture on, but we can figure they make up the bulk of what's not used in Potter and those other two sources.
But then some of those agricultural users also, I mean, they're taking water, but there's a reason why there's water in there. You know, because they have the land that's recharging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of complex, but I'm just laying it out on the table now, so we all start thinking about, okay, what are the silos for where the water's coming from? What are and what are we going to get back? So if someone is eventually paying up to $200 an acre foot for water, which I think could be a fee when the Potter Valley project is repurposed and becomes a JPA, then there's going to be the issues of, well, I'm already paying a whole bunch of money. Why do I need to pay more for a groundwater fee when I'm not pumping out of the ground?
Yeah, and these are all really good feedback points for Catherine and her team. And I think this also goes back to not only look at the complexity of, okay, how simplistic or how complex do we want this to be so you can have the understandability factor be conveyed, but then also what's the financial stability of each one of these options. Mm-hmm. Really quick time check. We have 16 minutes.
Okay.
So we can move on from that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll move on from that. But yes, these are all the kinds of things we need to talk to people about. And just, again, going back to the data, can we say with certainty a certain property is only using surface water? You know, how do we determine that? So those are the kinds of questions we have to ask. Okay, let's move on. All right, so let's move on to the financial outlook. Again, I just want to emphasize that these are preliminary draft numbers. We have plenty of time to refine these. I know you have not seen the data behind what I'm about to present, but I want to give you an idea of how much money we are looking to raise from a fee, okay? Okay, and first of all, just talk about developing the revenue requirement. So a revenue requirement means how much money you need each year to raise from the fee. So you might have some other sources of revenue to take into account, but how much money do you need from the fee? So we have done a short-term outlook, short-term being 5 years, and we have developed this revenue requirement based on staff's knowledge, I should say what was in the GSP, consultant expertise and experience. And largely this is a combination of experience from KSN and Elizabeth's group, and also your own staff at the GSA. So we have really two buckets of costs that we include. One bucket is what we call administrative costs. These can be general. So for example, charges from the county for doing the books and those kinds of things. The costs of board meetings, keeping the website up to date, your legal services, insurance costs, and fee program costs will be new costs. So we did add in some cost for, we just assumed if the county did put the fees on the property tax roll, for example. And then there are GSP-driven costs. So these would be items that are in the GSP that you're moving forward with implementation. And that includes things like GSP implementation oversight, your contracts and fiscal management, outreach and engagement on those items, and grant writing. So that's one bucket. And then the other bucket is those GSP implementation items. I have grouped this into 3 different categories. Monitoring, reporting, so those are the things you have to provide specifically to DWR, data collection, etc. Studies, so these are your kind of investigative studies. You're trying to learn more. So there's a recharge master plan in there. There's a water supply resiliency study in the next 5 years. And these have been identified as really critical studies to do because they provide the foundation for what might be a next step that you're looking at in the GSP. So the GSP listed a lot of different potential items, and Elizabeth's group worked through, okay, of all of this list, what is the order in which things need to happen to facilitate doing the next step? So we have studies and then programs. And programs include things like the voluntary metering program, assisting your partners with certain implementation projects that they take the lead on, and also a land repurposing program that could kick off in like the very end of this 5-year period is what we've put it in. Again, we have time to refine this, and I know I feel like I'm throwing a lot at you here, but again, try and get broad picture. So let's go to the next slide. I do want to talk about the fact that I have excluded potential grants in this 5-year outlook. And I want to tell you why. And also say that based on what I heard earlier today, if by the spring time frame you've locked in those grants with CDFW, then we will update the financial outlook and account for that. But my approach to rate studies is always, if you don't have that grant locked in, don't assume it's happening. There's so many instances I know of where that's been assumed and it's fallen through. So here's some good reasons I think why you want to exclude potential grants. You're at the mercy of politics and robustness of the California and the national economy. It really constrain and will often extend your planning process. So again, if you've planned for these grants coming in and in 18 months' time you didn't get them, now your fee's not covering what you wanted it to cover, you can't achieve what you thought you were going to achieve, you're moving things around, straining the planning process. It delays progress of needed planning activities and projects. It's kind of the same thing, really. It places the GSA in jeopardy of not reaching measurable objectives set out in the GSP that the DWR expects. So that is really important. You absolutely have to have your revenue source set up so that you can show DW how you are working towards those measurable objectives. And also, and I've really experienced this in the last year, it hides the true costs and benefits of the GSA's activities to all of the parties that benefit from a sustainably managed hydrographic basin. And I think Eric will back me up on this, because GSAs I've worked with, they started out with a fee and they had large grants from the state to get on their feet. Those grants running out, I know other GSAs didn't get the round 2 grants that they thought they might, like yourselves, and they set a fee based on having large grants. The grants go away, and now their fee is far too low, and they have a customer relations issue because they have started out with fee, and now they're doubling, tripling the fee, and they have to explain that to people. So that's why I'm saying I've put this together assuming you don't have those grants. What is really important, though, is that you establish a procedure to designate what happens with those excess revenues if you do get the grant. Because if your grant comes through, now you've collected more in the fee than you needed to. If you have an adopted policy in place, you know what you're going to do with that money. And you're going to put it into a designated fund, and it will wait there until it can be used for a designated activity. And that provides confidence that you have a planning purpose with the fee and with the grants. Okay, let's keep going. I'm a bit worried I'm going to run out of time. Really important to know, too, is that SGMA specifically says it lists the activities you can spend a fee on, and it lists prudent reserves. So what kinds of things could be considered prudent? Well, a general reserve, certainly, and provide some criteria reasoning for this. And I'm going to say, here's an example. You might want 8 months of operating expenses because your revenues are remitted with property tax, and you only receive those in December and April. So you've got to get through April to December, potentially without any cash flow coming in, any revenues coming in. So, and I've seen this with another GSA that has to go out and get a line of credit, and those lines of credit are expensive. Then you might have oh yeah, go ahead, Eric.
And could you just clarify the difference between the line of credit rates from a private line of credit versus a county or some other type of GSA member that
Yes,
can do it?
really good point. So some GSAs are kind of pretty well tied in with the county, and counties will often provide a county line of credit to the GSA. But if that's not available, then you're looking at going out to the private sector, and that's banks. Private, it could be a national chain type bank, or it could be a local bank. But if you're going out to the private sector, you're looking currently at interest rates of about 9.5%. And the county's probably going to be more like 1.5%. So I think that could be part of your conversation you have about how you want to handle your banking affairs in the future. You might want to set up some specific reserves. I know GSA has set up a reserve specifically for potential litigation, for example. You might have an emergency reserve. You might want to have a rate and fee stabilization reserve to smooth out fee changes. So that's a great example. You get the grant in, you don't have a project you're ready yet to spend that fee revenue on. Well, maybe you put it into the rate and fee stabilization fund so that in 3 or 4 years' time, you're not having to raise the fees as much. Okay? All right, so let's get through these graphs. This is a graph that shows the projected administration costs, so general and the GSP-driven, and I'm using your actual adopted fiscal year 2024 budget there, about $172,000, and that's projected to go up to about, and I'm going to say big round numbers here, $382,000, but I should really have been in bigger numbers because we're really not down to the $2,000 kind of number. Just to give you an idea. So this includes all the administrative costs you know today, but it also includes GSP-driven costs that will be incurred. As you do studies, you do programs, you are going to have more costs associated with those. So we've put that into this cost projection, as though it's a big estimate.
Could you just speak to, do these numbers look comparable to what other GSAs are providing?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look at that really in great detail, and I think that I'd be a little bit wary of that because every GSA, they really are so unique in how they're set up and who's staffing it. But I will say, yes, in the sense that almost all GSAs are outsourcing their administration, running of the GSA. So just like you do with Eric and Indigo, that is the most common model. And in terms of how those costs compare with what I see, I'd say it's definitely in the ballpark, yes. I don't see anything weird here, but again, those are hard comparisons to make. Okay, let's go to then the GSP implementation action costs. And this is where, of course, it's very, very much estimated because you as a board can always prioritize certain studies and programs ahead of others. So we took a guess at this based off of prioritization, certain criteria that we developed. But in fiscal year 2024, your GSP implementation action costs are about $266,000. And you see that going up into like the $1.5 million range. Again, assuming no grants. And a couple of these are rather large grant projects. So, $1.4 million for the interconnected surface water project.
And that's
right?
with the assumption that it's not grant funded. What would that cost, right?
Yeah.
Being reflected here versus if we have the grant, then that changes what this would ultimately look like.
Yes, exactly. So this could change quite a bit, but let's just say want to achieve all these things that we think need to occur in the next 5 years and they're not grant funded, then we're looking at a fee that goes up to about $1.5 million.
That looks astronomical to me.
Mm-hmm.
To go, that's like what, a 500% increase?
It's a very large increase, and yeah.
Yeah, just to provide clarification to like the projects and stuff that are in here driving this. Right now, our GSA is doing the bare minimum for compliance. That is
basically not doing much other than the CDFW projects that are trying to push us forward to move towards continued sustainability. But there's projects that we need to do at some point to keep on that track. And then the other thing, the really big factor that's not even accounted in here yet, but it could come into play, as Chair McGordy pointed out, is the future of the Potter Valley project. That could have a huge impact on what we land up doing and how fast we need to move things forward. So this is a best guess, assuming that Potter Valley project maintains where it's at and we move towards certain things. I know this looks like it's a big ramp up, but this is not an uncommon thing, because at the end of the day, we have to become self-sustaining. And actually, if you can move a couple slides ahead to the revenue share, right here, or the next one.
Yeah.
So here, this is to point out that fee revenue versus GSA members. So GSA members, IRWA, everyone else, right? You guys have all committed to supporting the GSA to the end of fiscal year 2026. So this is also taking into account that revenue structure of GSA members contributing dropping off and then having the fee replace that now. So that's also come into play here. So
I know, it just looks like a lot because, and it comes back to equity, fairness, like the Potter Valley project. Not everybody should be paying for that. Only the people who really benefit from that should pay for that, right? I mean, right? So there's a lot of things that go into it, I think.
Yes, and you will have the opportunity to vet through those costs and see, exactly what's in there.
Yeah.
And so that you can really understand that. And we can also talk about strategy. Do you go straight up to a fee that supports that level to start out with? Or do you ramp it up? Because there is that fear of starting out at a lower level, like many other GSAs have, and then having to raise it really quickly meaning like in the next 4 years. And so that's another thing we'll talk about.
Yeah. And just recognize that right now our economy is crap. I mean, the cost of everything has gone up, right? Everything. PG&E, water, groceries, gasoline, everything. My Pepsi, went up 100% in cost. So I don't know. When you're looking at putting another fee on the public, I think we have to be really cautious, and I don't know, maybe in 2 years we'll have a better economy if we have a different government, but right now it's just, I don't know, these numbers are scary to me. Like, I have anxiety right now looking at millions of dollars of fees.
Yeah, and I think the biggest objective of this is to just give you a glimpse of, this is like a first draft. These are just some of the numbers we're thinking about, we're working through. Thought was put into this, but everything is up for refinement. And to your point about, this is a tough economy and where we're at right now, totally recognize that. And that's just the unfortunate part about an unfunded mandate, is that we have to comply with SGMA. There is no choice. The other choice is the State Water Resources Control Board steps in. If we get off track, they can step in and insert themselves. From what I hear, what's happening in Central Valley and further south, that is not going well. It's not fun. Those GSAs are really struggling through that, and it's just a difficult time for them and everyone. And they're similar to us where, they're small communities, mostly ag-based, that are also struggling, just like we are in different ways too. And then to your point, Adam, the other alternative, which everyone would like to avoid if possible, is adjudication. And adjudication is not cheap either. If in some cases it could be quite a bit more expensive. So, Indigo.
To add to your point, I just wanted to state that if, for instance, in those cases where the state board has had to come in and intervene, the fees are generally three times higher than anything that folks are paying otherwise too. So that is another consideration.
The cost of non-compliance is very significant to local residents.
Yeah, but you do recognize there's a difference between compliance and doing all these extra things that
Yeah.
we want to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So
and-
compliance and minimum is smart to do in an economy where everybody's suffering and we have
Yes.
low income areas,
Yeah.
really low, like we're a duct community, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So versus, all these great projects that we want to do that cost millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right? So I think there's a time and a place for everything when it comes to spending money,
Yeah.
other people's money.
Yeah. So, no, I love that point because I think that demonstrates, one, we have to think about how we can balance all these things, and then what type of, is there a ramp up? Does that make sense? What does that look like to try to balance all these things together? Because the more we do that, then the better off we are at getting adoption from everyone to move forward with it best.
I think there was a question behind.
Yeah, do we know how many parcels there are in the basin, how much acreage? I mean, I know how many water hookups we have.
Right, I don't have that, no, it's not
Yeah,
in my brain yet.
I mean, it would be nice to have just if we're trying to figure out who's paying what.
So someone's echoing, I don't know.
You are on now, yes.
Okay, so just doing a real quick check on this, if we figure that we've got about 15,000 irrigated acres, if everybody paid in, not just the people with wells, to do the minimum would be about $13 an acre, which is what we're paying now, about $200,000 a year. To go to like 2 million, we'd be assessing ourselves $125 an acre to make this work, which is a lot of money.
All right, let's keep going. I'm gonna,
And just want to recognize we're five minutes over, but we have another 5 minutes, and then I think we should conclude.
yeah, so I think we can skip this. Cash balances, that's all. We can skip that. Okay, let's go to summary discussion. Okay, so kind of wrapping this up. So how is the best fee determined? I've already mentioned it. I'm going to keep going on about this. It's based on our available reliable data. It's based off of the input from the customers, the stakeholders. We have to take into account resource capabilities, both of the GSA and participating agencies, which includes the county. The county might be a partner with how this fee gets implemented. And legal guidance, of course. There will be consideration, as I had mentioned, that reasonable relationship. Disparities in ability to pay and language and cultural barriers will also be considered, and that will come out of those stakeholder interviews. And what I really want to drive home is that we are going to work on a fee that makes sense for you, okay? And it will come out. It will come out in the data. It will come out in the conversations. There might be some, discussion, and the fee ranking could be interesting. But we will end up in a consensus. We will end up with a fee that works for you. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I want to make a point about these case studies because I have found some of them to not be very robust. There's confusion between assessments and property-related fees and regulatory fees and what kind of a study you do for it. And some of these case studies are really not very good for reference. You should choose a fee structure that works best for your beneficiaries. It could be a unique fee structure. And I think provided we have vetted through all of those goals and we have vetted it through legal, you shouldn't be worried about doing that. Okay. And then secondly, on the financial outlook, yes, it looks like a large increase. We might refine that. It might not look so scary. It might look just as scary, no promises. But super important recommendation is that you establish reserve policies concurrent with doing this fee study, and that you demonstrate a plan for use of fees, whether that's because you got the grant and now you have the additional money, whether it's because you think you need to have an emergency reserve, for example. Okay? And I think, Elizabeth, do I have one more or am I? Yes. So I do want to just talk quickly about schedule to completion. I've already kind of hit on the fact that the January meeting is going to be a very important meeting. Maybe we need to allocate sufficient time for that. Stakeholder interviews are going to start start next week. We are going to start contacting people, setting up interviews. We really hope to do several of them in 1 day or 2 days and come here and meet in person. We know the value of doing that. We will do virtual meetings too, but there are certain meetings that make sense to do in person. And particularly, we talked to the Farm Bureau, the Vintners Organization. If they have any type of committees, meetings that they have, we want to get on those committee meetings. So we don't want to create extra work for people, but if we can slot into meetings you already have, that's really great. Eric already mentioned the first community workshop will be the evening of in January, and then we'll have another one in March. We would like, assuming that the fee pathway is resolved in January and everyone's feeling good about the schedule still, then we plan to have a TAC review of a draft report in March, and to have that, it would be a draft final in April that the board hopefully approves. And then if it's a Prop 218 fee, the notices need to go out right away after that board meeting in April. If it's a Prop 26 fee, you have a little more time. You could move to May if you're not quite ready in April. And then in June, you do need to adopt that resolution, or it could be an ordinance. Because July, you're preparing bills for the next fiscal year. So is there anything else on the schedule that I missed there?
No, other than right now, we're on this track to have this be completed by August 2024. But as mentioned, if we do a 218 route, that potentially could move that schedule out to the next following August in 2025, depending on various factors which Catherine and her team will advise us on what's best based on where we ultimately land up. But I would also like to emphasize Catherine's point that these numbers are preliminary. They were developed with input from me and others who have a good understanding of where we think we need to go. However, that will need to be vetted more with all of your input, with the TAC, stakeholders, the tribes. Everyone has a voice at this, and it is totally up for revision. This is just an initial primer to give you all an understanding of the pathways, everything else to it. And then that way we can hopefully get to more confident understanding and be able to make a decision in January. But if we're not comfortable with the decision in January, we can then find another meeting in the future to have more time to get to that decision point in the future. So just want to make sure I emphasize that too. So thank you, Catherine and your team, for all this. We're at 4:41, so a couple more questions and then we should conclude.
Based on Catherine's recommendation, can we have council work on drafting a fee stabilization fund policy, not to present to the January meeting, because I think that'll be a loaded meeting, but maybe a meeting after that. So we're concurrently doing that so that when this goes into place, we already have a policy for a rate stabilization fund, fee stabilization fund.
That's a great idea, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Indigo, did you capture all that? Thank you. Just make sure I don't forget. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Just a observation. It looks like everything's tight, going to get a lot of work done in a relatively short amount of time. So being effective, not wasting time on things that maybe aren't really going to fly, like 218. That just seems like a dog.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
I wouldn't waste a lot of time on that. Just get us a good package on 26.
I agree.
Any other comments or questions from those in the online or in the audience?
Well, I'm just guessing that as time goes on, we're going to look at your $1.8 million budget and break down what's in that and what the state's asking us to do. And I can tell you, as going through our cannabis debacle here in Mendocino County, we finally said to the state, sorry, we can't do this with the staff we have, with the people we have, with our resources. We're not able to do this. And we renegotiated everything because it didn't make any sense what they were asking us to do. There was no way they would get across the finish line that they were requesting. And I wouldn't be afraid to do that. We need to advocate for ourselves. If something seems really unreasonable, we've got pathways that we can do that. And I just want to lay that out here right now because I know everyone's looking at this feeling a lot of anxiety. And, you know, what I've learned in politics is that everything is negotiable. So let's not forget that.
And there is an option for the board chair to assign a committee to work on this, on the more finer details. That is also something that we can consider doing. However, just to be very clear, everything has to be in the public domain, and there has to be a lot of, it's more on the legal nuances that we can be a little bit more careful. But the reason why these meetings have to be public and the workshops have to be public is that way everything is available, because everything we do with this has to be defensible, and what we present, what we say, what we talk about, that is all we have to use in any legal action that comes our way, if something comes from this study in that regard.
Hopefully not.
So with that, Chairman Gordy, I think we've covered everything, and we can conclude the meeting.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you very much for coming and all the good input.
Thank you, everyone online.